Afternoon, sir. Can you see and hear us?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I'll just wait for the room to quieten down before we start the questions. Thank you, everyone. Ms. Badenoch, can we turn to the issue of Henry Staunton, please? Sure. In your witness statement, your first witness statement, you deal with the dismissal of Henry Staunton, as we had asked you to do. Just by way of background, is it right he was appointed as the chair of the Post Office back on the 2nd of September 2022, and so predated your appointment as Secretary of State for about 5 months, or by about 5 months?
Yes. I'm not exactly sure of his appointment date, but it certainly predated me.
He wasn't, in any event, one of your appointments?
No, he was not.
When you started your position as Secretary of State in February 2023 and were briefed, was anything said to you about Mr. Staunton being problematic or an unsuitable person to be the chair of the Post Office?
Not when I first started. There were issues around general issues around the board, finding the right people and so on, and that it was not a happy place being at the Post Office, but nothing specific or personal. No.
So nothing specific or personal about him?
No. And
nothing of the order of magnitude that was suggested to you the following year, in January 2024?
No, nothing at all.
No. Okay. Can we go back to the briefing that you received, Bays 301061? And can we go to page 9, please? This briefing to you sets out the key stakeholders. And the first bullet point refers to Mr. Staunton, Post Office Chair Henry Staunton, and it says that it's recommended that you meet him. Did you meet Mr. Staunton?
No, I did not.
And why not? I
don't know. There was a recommendation that I met him, and I didn't say no to that. But nothing was ever organised. It may be that something was and it fell through. But I remember at this point, I'm still trying to carry out a lot of my trade secretary work. I'm travelling a lot. So if people weren't sort of banging on the door to meet, the meetings didn't necessarily happen. And remember, the Post Office is one of very many arm's length bodies. I didn't meet the people running a lot of them unless there was often an issue. I would get updates. They tended to meet with the Department Director General or with the junior minister. So a Secretary of State meeting was not necessarily prerequisites to doing the job. But those who wanted to meet me did meet me. There was never any request from Mr. Staunton either.
When you subsequently, thank you, that can come down, when you subsequently came to inform Mr. Staunton on the 27th of January the following year, 2024, in the course of a phone call that he was being dismissed from his position as chair of the Post Office, you made a number of comments about the fact that the pair of you had never met over the course of that year, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Can we look, please, at a recording or a transcript of a recording of that call, Bays 301059? You can see this is a transcription of a recording of the phone call that you had with Mr. Staunton on the 27th of January 2024. Now, I think you didn't have this transcript when you first made your witness statement.
No, I didn't.
You said that you very much wanted to have it and you'd asked departmental officials to track down a copy of the tape.
Yes.
And I think you worked in your first witness statement from a note, a near verbatim note taken by an official.
Yes.
And then a summary of that note, which was published to the media.
Yes.
Now, we've now got the tape and therefore this transcript of it. You'll see that it starts up sort of mid-sentence and doesn't include the introductions at the beginning, nor the part where you actually informed him that he was being dismissed.
No.
But we've got a verbatim note of that, and I needn't go back to that. Can you help us? Why was the call recorded?
To help the note taker carry out a good summary of minutes.
And is that usual?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't take the notes. It may be. It may not be.
Did you know that it was recorded?
Not at the time.
Okay, so this was something that was going on by...
This was something I discovered after... this is something I discovered after Mr. Staunton had made the false allegations to the Sunday Times. And when I asked for the transcripts and the notes that could, I didn't, explaining that I know I had not said the things which he said, I was then made aware that there is a recording which would prove that as well.
And do you know whether Mr. Staunton was informed that it was recorded at the time?
If I wasn't, I suspect he wasn't as well. The purpose of the recording was to get minutes written accurately, and probably they would have been disposed of immediately and maybe retrieved from deleted place. I don't know.
And is it normal then for all your calls to be recorded?
I don't know, because I've never had the situation before. Okay. So it probably isn't, but I suspect on this occasion it was just to make sure that the minutes were very accurate, given the severity and the media interest, that the minutes were very accurate. That's certainly what I was made to understand at the time, that it wouldn't necessarily be usual to have a recording.
Let's read through this. Mr. Staunton, in mid-sentence, says, change anything that requires the government civil servant where we get whistleblowed and whatever. You can. It's a massive, massive problem here in terms of trying to. At least you've got training going much better now. Things are moving in certain directions, but it's a handful, I've got to say. I've chaired some companies, a lot of companies, very successfully, but this one's a bit of a nightmare. But we could have got through it, but it needed UKGI to be on side, and I didn't feel they were on side for a moment. I'm sure that UKGI was talking to the journalist. That's what they did before, not actually sorting out the business. And the context of that is that by the time you're speaking, the fact that you were to dismiss him had already been leaked. Yes,
which was extremely frustrating, because I had wanted to do it in a particular sequence and spare him embarrassment where I could.
You say, I know, I'm sorry to hear that, but why didn't you get in touch with me? Him, because I had an inkling only last week with the chairman and chief executive UKGI, and I was going to tell them all this. I know it's UKGI, but I've never met you, you see. I've chaired so many companies you would not believe. I'm working on this business 60 hours a week, whereas I can take Swiss, despite I chose Swiss as an international company where the share price more than quadrupled, and I could do that on 15 hours a week. This is 4 times the time. You just wouldn't know the half of it, Secretary of State. I do know. This is what the world is like today with the public sector. What I did find out of the ordinary was that of all the arm's length bodies that I'm responsible for, the Post Office was the one where I never heard from you directly. You know, the CMA, UCES...
that would have been UKEF, UK Export Finance.
The British business banks, the chairs of all these organisations would reach out to my office fairly frequently. And Kevin Hollingrig did manage the relationship very well. But there didn't seem to be any interest in doing much more. Just stopping there, what did you mean by that? Kevin Hollingrig did manage the relationship very well, but there didn't seem to be any interest in doing much more.
And that Kevin did have meetings with him, and he fed back to me how that relationship was going. And so in terms of making sure that he was staying in touch with the Post Office, that was going well. But what I was trying to signal to Mr. Staunton, and which I do believe now, is that he didn't seem to want to meet me. And, one can speculate on the reasons from a hindsight perspective, but at the time, I simply assumed that he was perfectly happy having meetings with Kevin Hollenrake. In hindsight, I think that he did not want to meet me.
And so there didn't seem to be any interest in doing much more. You're saying interest by you, Mr. Staunton?
Well, yeah, the interest in Mr. Staunton doing much more with, in terms of relationship with ministers.
So by that you mean, but you didn't seem to have any interest in doing much more?
Yes, that's what that...
So that's directed towards Mr. Staunton, not Mr. Hollenrake?
No. I think Mr. Hollenrake did an excellent job.
You continue, I've been given a very, very high-level overview of the government's issue that's led to the advice given to me about the decisions which I've now taken. But I want to make sure you've had a chance to make your views known as well. Given where we are and what I've just said, what would you like to see happen now? So what we need to do is actually, over the page, it's a very difficult one with regard to the CEO, who's very unstable. And actually, I said to Lorna, that's Lorna Grattan, yes, UKGI, we need to have an adult conversation with him to say, look, stay through the inquiry and we'll treat you as a good leaver, nail him down for 12 months. Well, of course, she says, oh, well, in this government, it's very difficult to offer good leaver status. If we have a crisis, it's not a big deal. He might get an extra 100,000 that he wouldn't get if he wasn't a good leaver, but at least we nail him down for a year. And the money he would get for good leaver status actually seems to be more important to him than actually the sums involved. So I think we need to nail the chief exec down. That's the first thing. The second thing he goes on to address, we must do something about, we must make this organisation more postmaster-centric. I said we need to have an oversight committee chaired jointly by the two postmaster directors. We need to introduce a third postmaster director so the message will get out to the network that the post office is changing. And trust me, at the moment, it is terrible, the view of the post office out in the network. So have a third postmaster. We're really then, Secretary of State, starting this journey towards demutualisation. We're not to say that, but that's what you need to do. The SID process, over the page, it's 6 for 2. Never mind what Lawler thinks and the fact we've gone outside. The fact is, when the facts change, you change your decision. We need to have an internal policy. If you met at Darfur, you'd recognise this is a class act, which ought to be asked. So I can quite see why everyone's got there. And the fact we started out on a public journey, it was a different world just 2 months ago. I mean, we were just, it's just been horrific the last 4 weeks. We need to get on the front foot, and I think postmaster-centric does that for you. Then moving on. There's the feeling within the business. Richard Taylor said all the postmasters are on the take, and they're all guilty as charged. We wrote to the Lord Chancellor stating that was our view. That would be Peters and Peters. That's not my view, and I don't think it's the view of the majority of the board. But I think that UKGI and people sending that letter with unclear, it was actually contrary to what the government ministers were trying to do. And in fact, you'd be surprised at the sort of things your civil servants say about ministers. So it's a mess. But the fact is, quote, you're guilty as charged, postmasters are on the take. So it's got to change, and we need a massive cultural shift in this organisation to do that. Most of the directors are on side, and the UKGI director is not. She couldn't run a bath, let alone a company. We've got a big problem there. We need to take some very tough business-like decisions in terms of culture to change it. When we talk about culture, as Nick said, Lorna thinks it would just be a crusade for a female diversity. It's not that. It goes to the heart of how we operate post office, this cultural shift. It's enormous what we need to do, but I think it's possible. I don't think we need to have Andrew as the Sid, the chairman, that will put it through. You need to change the UKGI directors and just get to the core. It's a battle that's winnable, but by God, it's going to be a battle. You say it certainly is. What in that previous passage were you agreeing with?
That it's going to be, that the sorting things out is going to be a battle.
Specifically, what did you think was going to be a battle?
I think that the conversation here was about the general board. So he says we need to change the UKGI directors and just get to the core. But he is giving a personal view about Lorna Grattan. And he thinks that the issue is between the post office and UKGI. I am, being amicable and saying, yes, it is going to be a battle. The board, in my view, was the issue, and there's a lot that needed to be done. That's what I'm alluding to there. It's not just about UKGI. But what I wasn't trying to do was give an opening for him to pick apart particular individuals on the board. I didn't think that that was a helpful road to go down. I did want to get his view about what had happened, and I didn't want to have an argument with him. So agreeing where I thought we could find some kind of agreement, and then moving the conversation on to the things that I was trying to elicit from him.
Can we move much further into the call and turn to page 9, please? This is you speaking at the top of the page, and this is about whether he should turn up the board to the board meeting that was going to happen on the Monday or Tuesday of that week. And you were saying, no, you should not. And you say, I'm sorry, but that would need to be the case, given the conversation we've had and what I suspect the media are going to be doing.
Sorry, could you just let me know where in the hard copy I can find...
BB19.
BB19?
Yes.
Bear with me. Thank you.
And we're at the top of page 9.
Yes.
So we dealt at the bottom of page 8 with not turning up at the next board meeting, and you say, I'm sorry, but that will need to be the case.
I think I'm talking about his leaving and about not giving reasons. Am I looking at the wrong...
Yes, you are. Bottom of page 8.
Bottom of page 8. So I'm saying, I'm sorry, but that will need to be the case.
So if we just go back on the screen to the bottom of page 8, please.
Right, sorry. Yes, I found it. It's page 9 on mine, but I found it. Thank you.
We can see that on this passage here...
Yes, that's right. This is about...
Immediately beforehand... you were trying to arrange some contact details.
Yes, that's right. I'm in the right place now.
You couldn't get anyone on the call that was listening in to acknowledge that they were listening in, and so you had to write down his mobile number or his email address.
I think that when the way that the government does these calls, it was a switch call that they were muted, and so they were unable to join the conversation.
Yeah, and so looking at the bottom of page 8, he says, therefore, I won't turn up to the board meeting on Monday or Tuesday. You say, yes, that's correct. He says, fine. Then we go to the top of page 9. You say, I'm sorry, that would need to be the case, which is why I said the context of you saying that was not turning up. So anyway, you carry on. Third line, if it's any consolation at all, I doubt it will be, but I'm very angry about the fact that this has been leaked without us doing this properly. And he says, appalling, appalling. And you say, it is appalling, and I've noted what you said about UKGI. I do think they have been part of the problem, and that is the next step. What problem would UKGI a part of?
I think that the communication channels between myself and UKGI should have been, there should have been more information passing direct to me, not just through Kevin. And Kevin would, of course, give me a summary. But there were some times that we actually ended up coming to different views on things. So we had different views, for example, on Nick Reed, the CEO. Not problematically, but we just had we just came to different conclusions. And I felt that my own interactions with UKGI were very limited. And I didn't actually meet Lorna herself until it was the issues with Henry Staunton had come to light and we were in the process of sacking him. And also, I was giving him the benefit of the doubt with what he had said earlier on in the conversation about issues with UKGI. If you remember, the views I have about Henry Staunton now are different from where I was at the time of this conversation, where where I was thinking this is someone who's made too many mistakes. The position is untenable, but he was probably in his own way doing his best. To where I am now, where there's just been repeated uses of misinformation and so on. I took it in good faith that his complaints about UKGI were well-meant and true from his perspective. Given everything that's happened since then, I don't think that his complaints about UKGI are well-founded.
So were you just saying, I think UKGI are part of the problem as a sop to him?
No, not so much as a sop, but if a chair feels that way, then UKGI should have been aware and should have made me aware as the sole shareholder, not just told Minister Hollenrigg. There was no note, for example. Just because I wasn't meeting them on a day-to-day basis doesn't mean that they couldn't have sent a note to me for me to review, and that didn't happen either. So these are the sort of processes which I would recommend to the new Secretary of State to ensure that UKGI are giving a full and frank view rather than just the vanilla view of what's going on. There's too much vanilla in terms of reporting, and actually it's very hard to know early when problems are occurring.
What do you mean there's too much vanilla?
That the way notes are written in the civil service is often in a way that too much isn't said. For me, and I'm speaking for myself now, other ministers may not necessarily want this. I prefer to just have the detail unvarnished. We think this person is a problem. We don't think they're doing a good job. We think that they are dishonest, and so on. People tend not to like writing things down, maybe because of inquiries like this or an FOI request, or who knows. So instead, you get what I call a vanilla version of there are concerns. And that could mean anything. It could mean that there are minor concerns which you don't need to worry about, or there are very significant concerns which we don't want to put on paper. And as a minister who's getting 100 pieces of information a day where you have to prioritize, you might not recognize that there's a big red flag because of how a note has been written. And this is standard across the civil service. It's just the way things are written, probably to not alarm people, to not create panic, and to keep the discretion there, because it's very hard to keep all notes secret, even when they're marked official sensitive. And maybe UKGI didn't have this view, I don't know, but I do find that the unvarnished truth is more helpful than the vanilla version.
Can we take that down and go back to the process that led to the dismissal of Mr. Staunton by looking at your first witness statement, please? It will come up on the screen for you. It's page 2, paragraph 10. And if we just go down, under the heading concerns regarding Mr. Staunton's conduct, you say on the 24th of January, so that's 3 days before this call that we're speaking about, I received a written submission dated the 23rd of January, prepared by UKGI and departmental officials, in which I was advised of specific concerns in relation to Mr. Staunton's conduct and his suitability for office. They were, and then you list them, 1 to 5, it goes over the page. That fairly reflects the document, so I'm going to read them out.
Okay.
1, he had repeatedly attempted to shut down a whistleblowing investigation into his conduct. 2, he had engaged in aggressive, intimidating and disrespectful behaviour to other board members and members of the Post Office executive team. 3, he showed continued poor understanding of the public sector aspect of Post Office's work and poor judgment. 4, he had disregarded proper governance processes as the chair, most recently by announcing the appointment of a new senior independent director for Post Office without following formal consultation with the board, following board processes or seeking shareholder approval as required. And 5, he'd failed to provide constructive support to the Post Office's CEO. I think it follows that so far as you are aware, none of the issues that were set out for you included the speed at which compensation was to be paid by the government or the post office to sub-postmasters arising from the scandal, nor a dispute between Mr. Staunton and the government and or post office about that speed.
No.
In particular, the go slow suggestion that he was subsequently to make did not feature in the list of 5 issues that were brought to your attention.
No, they had nothing to do with that submission. And you know, from our earlier session, the letter that I wrote to Treasury showed that we were not. That's certainly not what my department was doing.
11, the submission recommended I should decide that Mr. Staunton could not continue in his role of chair. If you agreed, you should offer him the opportunity to resign rather than exercise your power under the Articles of Association to remove him. You record, and this is backed up by the documents that you refer to, that submission was referred in paragraph 13 to your private office by email with a covering text that said that the submission reflects the Permanent Secretary's view as well as that of Government Legal Department and UKGI lawyers. It was the submission placed in an overnight box together with a box note, and the box note, and you give us the reference there, stated that the recommendation to remove Mr. Staunton came from the Senior Independent Director and the Remuneration Committee Chair. The concerns included allegations of misogyny and racism against Mr. Staunton, and that officials agreed that his conduct and judgment made him unsuitable to continue as chair. Was it on that basis that you decided to dismiss him?
It was on the basis of everything that had come to light. A conversation with Kevin Hollenrigg, but also going back to the point that I made earlier about doing the right thing and being seen to do the right thing. I think that we should always be clear about what we are doing. And if you are sacking someone, then giving them the opportunity to resign can mean that a different story is communicated to the public. And I wanted people to be clear about what was happening. I didn't want him to have a huge amount of embarrassment. I wanted us to have a controlled story about why we'd asked him to leave, which we lost because of the leak. But the initial recommendation, which I was considering about giving him the opportunity to resign, I did not think was the right one, given the detail of the allegations, the seriousness of them, and the sheer number of issues that we were having with him as chair.
Thank you. You refer in that series of documents to the initial note, the submission that came up to you in the box. Can we look at that, please? Bays 40868. This is the submission that came up to you, as you said, on the 24th. It's dated the 23rd. It's addressed to Kevin Hollenrigg and you, addressed to you by Lorna Grattan and Carl Cresswell from UKGI and the department, respectively. And then in the first line, it says, "We have previously expressed concerns to you about Henry Staunton's suitability to be chair of the Post Office Board." Firstly, is that accurate that they, either Lorna Grattan or Carl Cresswell or both, or their departments, had expressed previously concerns to you about Henry Staunton? Yes,
it isn't just accurate, it's also illustrating the point I made earlier about the vanilla, the vanilla update. Concerns had been expressed, but not detail. So it was statements like, we don't think it's going to work out with the post office, we have some concerns. And I would ask, what's happening? Well, there's an investigation, we can't really talk about it. We're not supposed to know, we don't want to prejudice, but we'll let, eventually we'll let you know, by which time it's time to sack. So it is true that they had previously expressed concerns, but the strength of the concerns was not clear until the submission, which we just referred to in January.
Can you recall anything in more detail about the substance of the concerns?
No. If what came out in the submission had been said previously, I would have taken much more of an interest. But the way that the information had been conveyed was that there was a problem and the processes were in place to handle them, and I didn't need to worry about it. Minister Hollenrake would look more, but at the right escalation point, I would be informed. So from my perspective, the system was working. That there was a problem. It wasn't yet Secretary of State level issue. They were trying to resolve it. And because we had other issues, there was the problem with the inquiry metric and the bonuses which had been paid. It felt at that point like one of those things where they just weren't getting a handle of the job.
Do you think the department should have acted sooner in dealing with and or removing Mr. Staunton?
I don't know. I think it's hard to carry out a significant action like that in terms of removing someone when the processes haven't been followed because of the unfair dismissal, employment tribunal type repercussions which could come from not doing things properly. So when it comes to acting quickly, I always start from the perspective of who is impacted. So with the acting quickly in terms of getting postmasters compensation, yes, because we want to make sure that they're treated properly and fairly. But acting quickly in terms of sacking a chair creates the opposite issue, where someone may not necessarily be treated properly and fairly because we're trying to move in haste. So it's always about what is the impact on the person? What is the outcome we're trying to achieve? I would rather make some mistakes and get compensation out to postmasters quickly, but I would rather take some time and act slowly in order to make sure that we don't sack someone unfairly or give them a right of appeal or a right to a fair hearing where a process demands that. And I also believe very much in the concept that people are innocent until proven guilty. I think if we'd acted much faster than that, that would have been against that principle.
Were you aware before you accepted the advice to dismiss Mr. Staunton that he was a strong advocate and supporter of the sub-postmaster non-executive directors?
No, I was not aware, but I'm not sure that that is necessarily true, given what I remember people saying when I did visit the post office. There were a lot of sub-postmasters who did not like Mr. Staunton, so that's his word, and there's no reason for us not to believe him, but the evidence of that I didn't think was much.
I'm referring specifically to being a strong supporter of the sub-postmaster Neds on the board.
Again, same. That's actually what I did mean. Both sub-postmasters and the ones on the board. He always said that. He certainly said that in his call to me. But of course, that's a call we're having after he's just been relieved of his position.
Thank you. That can come down. You, I think, were party to the appointment of Nigel Railton as Poll's chair, or at least interim chair, is that right?
Yes.
Can we look, please, at Bayes 301070? This is a letter from you to him in May 2024, in which in the opening paragraph you extend your congratulations to him on his appointment as interim chair of the post office and welcome him in your role as the sole shareholder. Yes?
Yes.
I just want to look at the strategic priorities. You'll see that's the heading of the letter. Strategic priorities for 2024 to 2025. Can you help us? What's the purpose and status of a letter like this?
So it is to formally let someone know what you're expecting them to do in the job.
Is it what you're expecting them to do in the job or what you're expecting Post Office to do as an organisation?
Well, specifically, In this case, it was what I wanted him to look at as chair of the post office. I can't remember whether this had been done for the post office. It wouldn't be an annual, it's written in an annual way now, but it wouldn't necessarily be an annual set of priorities. We normally do those sorts of things over several years. So if strategic priorities had been done, a previous Secretary of State would have done them. We tend to have policy statements for regulators and arm's length bodies about what we expect them to do. But 2024-25 was very much a focus on conversations which I'd had with him about urgently turning things around for the post office.
I should have said that this is a draft, hence the date and the passage in grey. You tell us in your second witness statement, no need to turn it up in paragraph 36, that this is a draft version, but that you understand that the final version cannot be located by the department, although you believe it would have been in very similar terms.
Yes.
If we scroll down, please. You say, I would like you to focus on the following priorities. For
Sorry, can you tell me where in the hard copy I can see this?
Yes,
please?
BB25.
BB25.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So the main paragraph from the bottom highlighted, in this capacity, I'd like you to focus on the following priorities for the financial year 24-25. And then there are three priorities set out in bold. Number one, intensifying existing work streams to address post office's historic failures and setting the business up for future success. Then over the page. Two, supporting the cultural transformation of the company and focusing on improving on post office's capacity, capability and resilience at all levels. And then three, enabling the future success of the post office, including effective financial management and performance to ensure medium-term viability. And then particulars are given in bullet points under each of those three strategic objectives.
Yes.
One of the points that you mention under 3, and it's the fourth sub-bullet point under 3, is maintain stringent cost control and a focus on value for money and efficient delivery across the cost base, including on the new branch IT, NBIT, and IT projects, legal costs, acceleration of the network strategy, of the approach to directly managed branches, and measures aimed at reducing central costs. Now, I don't think NBIT, the new branch IT programme, is mentioned in your witness statements. Can you recall when you first became aware of NBIT?
No, I can't recall when I first became aware of NBIT. It might have been in that initial briefing or in subsequent meetings about the post office. But the most substantive conversation I had about NBIT was when I visited the Aldwych branch of the post office and spoke to them about how that project was going and what they needed from me.
Were you consulted or provided with updates regarding the development of NBIT?
No, not directly. I imagine Kevin was, but I was not.
Did you have any oversight of the post office's approach to and the rolling out of NBIT?
No, and I wouldn't expect to. That's the sort of thing which I think the post office has to do itself. Having political direction is very different from the sort of operational day-to-day decisions which would have been taken. But this was put in as a strategic priority because I'd had that meeting and I was quite concerned, just from my own background in technology, about the direction the project was going.
Does it follow that, so far as you're concerned, post office's engagements regarding NBIT were limited to essentially funding requests?
Yes. Certainly, that was my experience. It might not have been Minister Hollenrich's experience or previous Secretaries of State's experience, but that was my experience. But I also would not expect to be getting into the detail of the IT projects of the post office. I would have been expecting a high-level overview of what they were trying to achieve and how much money they needed.
Government ministers said the same to us when they gave evidence to the inquiry. about the development and rollout of Horizon, I wouldn't expect to be getting involved in that kind of thing. Does it follow that you have not been made aware of any issues with the development of MBIT?
Well, the project is overrunning and it's requiring a lot more than was budgeted for it. That, in my view, is an issue. But in terms of how it is working, no, and I would not expect to see that. I did have some conversations about how to extend the new Horizon system, which Fujitsu had been supporting, because that would have, we needed something in place. That ending would cause a serious problem for postmasters. So managing the day-to-day contract and ensuring that that continued until a replacement was ready was very important to me, because otherwise everything would fall over.
Thank you. That can come down, that document. Just lastly then from me, you tell us in your witness statement, I'll read it out without turning it up, if it, that's the post office, was a private organisation, it would have disappeared in its current form long ago. We're keeping it alive. The result is that it's in a permanent state of stress. We will need to make sure that we're recruiting with that in mind. Would you agree that it's imperative not merely to keep post office alive, but to transform it?
Yes, I would.
What, in your view, is essential in terms of what needs to be done in order to change or to transform the post office?
Well, this is a very difficult question because the fundamentals which underpin the post office are very difficult to manage in the age that we live in. Pre-internet, the post office would have been a commercial entity that any organization would bite its hand off to run. The universal service it effectively provided just meant that it had a very easy stream of cash. Now that is not the case. But we believe, certainly when the Conservatives were in government, we did believe that this is an entity that has not just operational significance, but also a cultural significance that should not be lost. How we maintain that going forwards, given how much it costs, is very difficult. The sort of transformation that you might have in a commercial organization just doesn't work in government. The sort of decisions which you would take, which are around profit and profit for the shareholder, just don't come into play. And that, I think, is what I was alluding to in my witness statement when I say it's just in a permanent state of stress. I was the sole shareholder. The business secretary is the sole shareholder, but even they aren't the ones who provide the money. It's a totally different department. So it just doesn't make sense the way a commercially structured organization in the private sector would be run. And any sort of transformation, in my view, needs to start from the objectives which we have in mind for what the post office needs to deliver, how it works within that universal service obligation which goes with Royal Mail, making sure that everybody has access to posts, given that there's just a lot of competition. That's quite difficult to do within the restricted funding environment which is expected for every single public sector organization. It is not the customer's money, it's taxpayers' money as well. We subsidize this organization. How do we do so in a way that can keep it going, that can refresh it for the 21st century? It is a labor of love. And that's one of the reasons why I had to make a direct appointment for Nigel Railton rather than an open one. People are simply not interested now in going to work for the post office at that level because of the intense levels of public scrutiny, because of the difficulties in making decisions which you would be able to do very easily in a private sector organization. You need people who are prepared to do a difficult job as if they were public servants, even though that's not quite the case. And I think that that's a huge challenge in terms of transformation for the post office. I don't know how we do it. It requires its own piece of work. I know that there have been reviews. I don't think anyone has come up with the correct answers yet.
Thank you. Then, in terms of government's role in this, I just want to, very lastly, to ask you about a sentence or two in your witness statement. If we look at it, please. I think it's your second witness statement, and it's page 12, paragraph 41. At the top of paragraph 41, you're dealing here with decision-making within government, and you say something that you said to us more than once today, there's a cautious, risk-averse culture within the civil service, which is baked in. But then, do you see about 3 lines from the bottom there, it says, if we want our government to make decisions faster, we need to reduce some of the public law burden. Can you see that?
Yes, I do.
And if we choose not to do so, we must accept this has consequences for speed and efficiency of government. Every time we create more public law to hold the government to account, it is slower to deliver for people. I just want to make sure that we've understood what you mean by those sentences. Is it your evidence that the government's accountability to the courts is that which prevents it from acting with speed?
It does slow things down. If, as a minister, you make a decision, and every decision is open to challenge on the basis of judicial review, it is quite rational. The civil servants will do every single thing they can to make sure that you don't end up getting taken to court. All of those things which they do end up slowing down the process. It is just part and parcel of, of creating more accountability, that you add extra processes. Those will take time. Those will need to be followed. It is a trade-off that is baked in. It is a part of creating accountability, that things, you can't just have someone making a decision and saying, do this, and the thing happens instantly. It means that things never happen instantly because you have to create an audit trail. You have to go through the checks and balances. You have to have more meetings. You need to consult. Consultations can take months. All of those things slow down the pace of delivery. And it's not about criticizing accountability. It is about understanding where the opportunity costs are and making sure that we can see where it is that perhaps these things might need to change in order to stop the sort of injustice which we saw take place around Horizon, or in fact with delays to paying compensation. And it's also the same thing even within the case of Henry Staunton. You asked the question, why didn't we remove him earlier? If we had done that, then we could have created more problems in the future by not providing the evidence and the audit trail. It's just part and parcel of accountability. But the more government does, the bigger government gets, the more it has to do these things. The more requirements there are on the Treasury, the more likely it is that the Treasury is going to be saying no, or creating value for money arguments that mean that it's salami slicing everything, and everybody's just getting a little bit of what it needs rather than a big chunk to deliver and perhaps provide transformation.
Can I summarise that? It's your view that the rule of law stands in the way of delivery of services by government to the people?
No, that's not what I'm saying. This is not about the rule of law. This is about the burden of regulation. The burden of regulation is not the rule of law. You can have the rule of law without an excessive burden of regulation. But if you keep adding more and more rules, that will slow things down. It doesn't mean that you don't want the rule of law, but the rule of law has a purpose, and that is to create a fair system which everybody is treated equally and where everyone can receive justice. If you keep creating more regulations and people aren't getting justice, then something has gone wrong. And we should be able to look at that without assuming that this is a criticism of the entire system of the rule of law. It means that we should be able to look at how we can reform public law. The law is not above criticism. We should be able to say that actually this isn't working well. What can we do to improve it? Rather than what is happening now, where people say, oh, it's the rule of law, we can't touch it, let's not do anything. And then there's more and more injustice. We shouldn't be afraid to challenge ourselves. We shouldn't be afraid to challenge the system. We shouldn't be able to be afraid to challenge government. And we shouldn't be afraid to challenge the law if we think the law is not delivering for the people.
Ms. Badenoch, those are my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For answering some of them. Can I hand over to core participants, and I'd ask them to be mindful, please, of the time limits that we're operating under. Thank you.
With that mindfulness of time in mind, can I take you straight to a document, please? BEIS 0001061. It'll come up on your screen in a moment.
Okay. Is there a hard copy reference for that?
There probably is, but I'm afraid I'm going to look to Mr. Beer to supply the hard copy reference, as I don't have it. It's a document you were shown earlier on, your evidence, which if we go to the first of the 2 page 5s within the document,
BB3. Thank you.
thank you. Do you have the document?
I do.
The page I'm looking at is Post Office Strategy. There
Yes.
are 2 page 5s within this document, which I think you commented on with Mr. Beer, that it's probably a document that's been reworked for your purposes.
Yes.
And if we look there under Post Office Strategy, Ms. Badenoch, it then says this final bullet point: recent ministers have been more cautious about going public on this work than their predecessors. As a result, we are taking this strategy policy work forward only internally within HMG and together with POL. We will then advise ministers of the findings, and ministers, including with HMT ministers, will then decide whether they want to make any changes to the current policy framework, and if so, when to proceed with the necessary public consultation. Now, just help us unpack that. Recent ministers. Now, since, 2019, which is when the High Court litigation took place, what we call the GLOW litigation took place, and essentially the Post Office was found in 2 seminal judgments to have failed sub-postmasters, right? So since that time, we had Miss Andrea Leadsom from 2019 to 2020. Then from 2020 to 2021, Lord Alec Sharma. After that, in 2021 to 2022, we had Mr. Kwartang. And then from mid-2022, so 22 to the mid of 2022, we had Mr. Rees-Mogg. And then your immediate predecessor was Mr. Shapps. So we had a revolving door of ministers, really, going through, I'm afraid, the role that you then took up as Secretary of State. So the ministers that seem to be being referred to here in the final bullet point, recent ministers have been more cautious about going public on this work than their predecessors. The title of the work is being Post Office Strategy. When you came into post, did you find that any work had taken place regarding Post Office Strategy?
I believe that there had been some work being done. I don't have the documents in front of me, but I remember us looking at what the Post Office was doing in 3 buckets, dealing with compensation claims and the fallout of Horizon, managing the day-to-day running of the Post Office and the future transformation, the NBIT IT program, and also thinking about how and where this might interact with Royal Mail, which of course we also had some responsibilities for in terms of delivering its universal service obligation. So the issue here around revolving ministers, I think, can often be overstated, primarily because people often don't understand the difference between setting political policy direction and company policy direction. And it was one of the questions which Council asked right at the beginning in terms of who is carrying out the policy work. There is policy in terms of internal company policy, which officials might have some view on, but general overview that comes from ministers is often political in nature. So I'm not surprised, for example, that it says that recent ministers had been cautious about going public, because there's a lot of deliberation which takes place, which in a commercial company just wouldn't happen, but because it's a public company, people are more interested in. But it's not necessarily helpful when you have not come to a final conclusion or a decision. Listening to ministers and officials and the post office executives deliberate is not helpful until you actually have a clear sense of direction of where the post office wants to go. And the strategy work, which had come back, was often very, very speculative in nature. Demutualization, do we even need a post office? Having those sorts of conversations in public is very alarming for people who are hearing the conversation happen before you've actually settled on a direction. So that's not surprising to me at all.
The judgments which were the starting point for this inquiry, in which this inquiry is based, were in 2019. Now, we finally hear this year from Mr. Railton, who comes to this inquiry to give evidence, and he says, well, there's been a submission up to government this year, after your time in office, setting out a proposal for the forward-looking strategy to govern the post office into the future. It doesn't seem as though, frankly, anything's been done, Ms. Badenoch, from 2019 until after your appointment of Mr. Railton, when he decides that, well, something ought to be done about this, really, and maybe we ought to nudge government's arm.
No, that wouldn't have been the case. Nothing had been decided, but if you recall looking at the strategic priorities that I set out for Nigel Railton, I also asked him to have a look again, because I did not think that we were getting anywhere with the previous strategy discussions. And I seem to remember that some consultants had been brought in. I can't remember whether that was Grant Thornton and what their remit had been. But this was something that had been worked on, but never concluding. And I wanted something that was specific with a proper outcome, which was viable to deliver. Because at the end of the day, we would have to go to the Treasury rather than the public for the money. But this is, in my view, not as a result of changing ministers. This is actually more as a result of other things that are happening in the background. Spending review settlements, changes in government more generally. It wouldn't have mattered if the same person had stayed in if you had a prime minister who's dealing with the fallout of perhaps COVID. When these conversations start, it's before a pandemic, priorities change. So you have to have all of those things in mind. We as ministers aren't just dealing with one organization. Even I, as Secretary of State, was dealing with about 30 or 40 different bodies. And that's something that would have an impact in terms of the priorities of the Post Office. And this also alludes to the final point which I was making, that the nature of this organization, sitting in the public sector, throws up all sorts of issues which you just wouldn't have in the private sector. And that's what, the questions you're asking are in that vein. They're showing up what some of these tensions are.
In fact, the strategic direction that you asked Mr. Railton to take in the document that you'll find within your pack at BB 25, I note from Mr. Beer's direction to that earlier, that says at bullet point 3, the first bullet point at 3, and I'll read out what it says. That says to Mr. Railton, oversee a strategic review of Post Office and provide ministers with your conclusions. So by the time we've gone from 2019 to your time as Secretary of State, to your time as Secretary of State, to May of 2024, we get within your letter to Mr. Railton, who you've appointed, your general request of him that he is to oversee a strategic review of the Post Office, and provide ministers with your conclusions. Now, hang on, that's 2019, 24, okay, let's be generous, just under 5 years, where you're having to go to the new chair that you've appointed and say, look, honestly, give this some thought. Now, that's a bit more than just problems with the revolving door. That seems to be that nothing has happened since 2019.
I disagree. Just because there is not a strategy that's being implemented doesn't mean that no work on strategy is taking place. But clearly, there are unsatisfactory conclusions. And also, which is part of the reason why we're having this inquiry, the organization itself is bogged down in dealing with historic and current issues. It is very hard to create a strategy for the future when the board itself and the organization is dysfunctional. It doesn't make sense to demand a strategy when the entire financial world in which we live in has changed. So whatever strategy was worked on would not have been something which would have been viable for the future, which is why I, as Secretary of State, ask the Chair, can you start again and look at what we can do given what we know now?
5 years after, or just under 5 years after, the Glow litigation was concluded. Let's move on to Fujitsu. Now, we know that the European Director of Fujitsu, Mr. Patterson, gave evidence before the Select Committee. I can't really ask questions about that, the subject of parliamentary privilege. He came along to this inquiry to give evidence, and he expressed his concerns about Fujitsu's operation within the scandal. And secondly, essentially, we know that Fujitsu have committed to providing something by way of a contribution towards compensation. Mm-hmm. And lastly, with Mr. Patterson, he answered my questions, which was about restorative justice, making sure that the wider range of people that have been affected by this scandal, in other words, family members, he said in the positive, he answered my questions positively and said that that's something that ought to be looked into, and seemed to be approving of the suggestion. So we know that Fujitsu are saying essentially, we'll put hand in pocket. Did they ever come to you and say, Secretary of State, we really mean that. What can we do to help and provide money? Did they have a meeting with you, arrange a meeting with you?
Well, we did have meetings. I can't remember the names of the executives who I did meet, but that included their global CEO or global chairman. But it was they had expressed that sentiment, but it was I who was asking for specifics, dates, times. I recall a meeting where I asked if they could do something early to show goodwill, being mindful that if they didn't, and not knowing when the inquiry would end, that there could be a change of government, the revolving door of ministers, moves again, and conversations could start from scratch. But in terms of them proactively offering, which I think is what you're asking, then the answer is no.
You see, the commitment they've made, and we know from Mr. Patterson, anticipate his evidence will be that essentially they're prepared to do something after the close of this inquiry. They await the report of this inquiry.
That's certainly the impression that I was given.
Did they provide any reasons as to why they need to wait until the close of this inquiry?
Well, this is now recall,
Yes.
which may not be 100% accurate, but I think it was about making sure that it was done properly. They seemed reluctant to start off with making payments before the inquiry was concluded, not dissimilar to the reasons that officials made or advised when we were asking for some of the compensation payments, about just wanting to make sure that they do it properly and do it at the right time. And that, they felt, was when the inquiry had given them an appropriate figure or something, or that they could judge what an appropriate figure would be.
There seems to be a certain irony about Fujitsu's operation, because they continue to operate the Horizon system, they continue to operate other contracts of government, they continue to take the government pound, and yet they don't appear to want to contribute within the lifetime of this inquiry to compensation or indeed restorative justice in real terms, i.e. financial terms.
Well, certainly that was the conversation that I had. I look at what the government is doing with Fujitsu in other areas completely differently, because they are different arms of Fujitsu, and not everybody can deliver on what they are doing, and simply yanking away contracts would not necessarily be what's right for the taxpayer or for the consumer at the end. So I think we need to look at those things quite separately. What is the right thing to do here? Does Fujitsu need to provide compensation? I believe that's absolutely right. Should they have done so in some form earlier? I would have liked to have seen that, but that does not preclude them doing so in the future. I imagine that they definitely will. I know that they've had an impact on their share price, for example, just from that documentary being aired at the beginning of this year. But I think we should also look at that very separately from Fujitsu's other operations, many of which have nothing to do with the branch that caused the Horizon issue. And of course, Fujitsu is still providing the software which the postmasters are using and which they depend on.
Lastly, you've only just started in your most recent post as Leader of the Opposition. From that perspective, do you have the opportunity to reach out to Fujitsu and put your weight and Conservative Party's weight behind engagement with Fujitsu to encourage them to perhaps do something sooner rather than later?
Not in the way that a Secretary of State would. It has to be the Secretary of State who does that. This is a government issue, not a Parliament issue.
Thank you, Ms. Badenoch.
Thank you.
Hello, Miss. You finish that. Good afternoon, Miss Badenoch. My name's Angela Patrick, and I ask for a number of sub-postmasters who were wrongfully convicted and have since had their convictions quashed. And you've got to, I only want to cover 2 topics with you. And the first is one you've just covered with Mr. Steen about compensation and families. And did you hear the questions we asked the Secretary of State this morning?
No, I did not.
Okay. We asked some very specific questions about one organisation. Are you aware of the organisation Lost Chances for Sub-Postmasters' Children? They're an organisation focused on securing financial support from Fujitsu to address the lost opportunities and trauma they experienced as children due to the impact of the scandal on their families.
No, I'm not aware. I know that there are many organisations, but not specifically this one.
Okay. Well, Katie Downey, Rebecca Foot and Katie Burrows from Lost Chances are sitting with me here today. And you've given evidence just now and before lunch about your own personal objective to ensure you did right by the sub-postmasters and being seen to be right and to be doing the right thing. Now, Mr. Steen's asked some questions about the contact you might have had with Fujitsu. Did those conversations with Fujitsu at any time cover the trauma and the lost opportunities experienced by the children of sub-postmasters?
No, I did not specifically speak about the children of the sub-postmasters. I simply talked about compensation for postmasters and their families.
And while in post as Secretary of State, had there been, as far as you're aware, any discussion within government about the question of redress or restorative justice for the families of sub-postmasters?
The conversations were always about financial compensation for sub-postmasters and their families.
And their families?
I believe so, because specifically in the context I remember having these discussions were where a sub-postmaster had passed away and what could be done for the families.
And when you were in government, can you recall if there was any discussion at all about creating any specific route or scheme to ensure redress specifically for the lost chances and trauma experienced by the children of sub-postmasters?
There was a conversation I recall us having about these requests being made, but I wouldn't be able to give you anything more specific than that, I'm afraid.
Okay. And would you accept, looking back and knowing the experiences that you had and your objective as Secretary of State, if the concern was really to do the right thing and to be seen to do the right thing, can the whole question of compensation, redress, restorative justice really truly be answered if those lost chances are overlooked entirely?
Well, I don't think that they should be overlooked. I think that they certainly need to be considered, because compensation isn't just about financial it's not just about financial loss. Reputational loss also took place as well as other things. But what I was not able to do was look into specific cases of postmasters or their families. It was about the principle of what we were trying to do, which was to make sure that we were being seen to be fair, being fair, and ensuring that justice was delivered. What justice looks like and how it is delivered is not always the case for ministers. It's something that we may have a view on, but this is what I believe the purpose of the inquiry is, so that everyone can see and hear and a fair conclusion is made.
Okay. And moving on, the second thing I wanted to ask you about is to return very briefly to something you said this morning. And you've covered decision-making in government on value for money and your correspondence with the Treasury and the rule of law most latterly with Mr. Beer. Just want to ask you about something you said. When you were asked this morning about what caused delay in compensation, you referred to the government machine. Very briefly, what is the government machine?
It is all of those processes, procedures, decisions, consultations, reviews, submissions, all of those things which need to be done to evidence decisions. and all of the people who are involved in that. It's not any specific individual. There is, in my view, nobody who wanted to slow down compensation. That was not the objective of anyone. There, of course, were people who quite rightly wanted to make sure that there was value for money. That is something that is part of the principles which we, as ministers and government officials, need to make sure. We can't just do what we like because it is not our money. The money belongs to people. But as more and more checks and balances are created, more and more accountability, more and more rules and regulations, these things do have an impact. And those things do tend to slow down processes where you just want to get people money out the door as quickly as possible.
Now, Mr. Steen's also given you a rundown of the individual ministers who came before you. If it's believed the government machine is broken, or if it isn't working very well, whose responsibility is it to take the steps needed to fix it?
Well, there needs to be an acknowledgement that the government machine and the system is broken. And I think you will find that I'm actually in a minority of opinion when I say that. And I think you will find that the government does not necessarily, and we have a new government, does not necessarily believe so. That is an argument that I've been making for a long time. But as you can see, given that I'm leader of the opposition, not Prime Minister, and not a Secretary of State, that is not an argument that I am winning. I think that this is something that we need to examine in and of itself. The way that we can have some reforms to improve the system need looking at. And I hope that that's one of the outcomes from this inquiry.
And I could just pause you there. We're here in the whole of this inquiry dealing with what's been described as one of the biggest miscarriages of justice in modern legal history. From your last responses to Mr. Beer, I suspect you'd accept whatever change is made to that machine, the machine must respect the rule of law.
Absolutely. The machine must respect the rule of law, but we also need to make sure that the laws are good. If you have bad laws, then the rule of law will not work out the way people want it to. We need to make sure that the laws themselves are good, and that is the job of legislators.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Badenoch. Nothing else from me.
Thank you.
Where are we now, Mr. Blake?
In fact, to me, sir, it's just Mr. Henry to go.
Well, what about an afternoon break?
So could I urge upon you to just let Mr. Henry ask his questions and then take the break so we can then switch the witnesses?
All right, but I'm becoming very concerned about the time left this afternoon, Mr. Beard. Over to you, Mr. Henry.
Thank you very much, sir. I just want to go to a little bit of your evidence where you stated, I think the communication channels between myself and UKGI should have been, and then you paused, there should have been more information passing direct to me, not just through Kevin. And Kevin would, of course, give me a summary, but there was sometimes that we actually ended up coming to different views on things. So we had different views, for example, on Nick Reed, the CEO, and then it reads, but problematically. But we just
Not problematically.
Exactly,
That's
I was going to, yeah, not problematically. What were the different views that you held to Mr. Hollinrake or Mr. Reed?
It was in terms of whether Nick Reed was doing the best that he could as CEO. And I felt that the issue was less Nick Reed, but more the difficulties of running that sort of organization in the first place. And of course, yes, mistakes had been made, but I did not think that Nick Reed was a bad CEO. He may not have been the right CEO, given what we know now. I don't think that when he was appointed, that was certainly an issue. But I saw someone who was trying to do his best. Kevin had a different view, but we're all entitled to our different opinions.
He had a different view, but of course you were very clear in the course of your evidence, and there's no criticism at all, because you had a huge portfolio, that you delegated considerable responsibility to him, although you were the ultimate decision maker.
Yes, that's right.
And so therefore he had a direct and far more first-hand grasp of the issues, would you agree, than you?
Not necessarily, because he gave me his full and frank view, but I also was able to observe CEOs across a whole number of arm's length bodies, which Kevin was not. So I was also able to make a comparison. And I was also making a comparison to CEOs who I had seen in the private sector. But also, Kevin was looking at this very much from the perspective of what was going on at the post office at that particular time. As a Secretary of State, attending Cabinet and looking at what other Cabinet ministers were doing, talking about and dealing with, I was taking a much broader view. And it is very often the case that people will look at the same facts and come to very different conclusions. People often witness the same events and give completely different witness statements. So I do not think that it is the case that just because I had delegated to Kevin that his view must have been the correct one and mine not.
But you definitely differed on this.
On that point, yes. Not, and as I said, not problematically, because in terms of conclusions, I did not think that we were going to change very much in terms of how we needed to manage the organization. My view was what Nick needed was a chair who was a little bit more hands-on, and that was why we made the direct appointment of Nigel Railton, so that he could provide support during Nick Reed's tenure.
Well, there's no need to go any further than what we have done, so I shall pause there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, there's one question I want to ask you, Ms. Badenoch, and it arises from a sentence in your second witness statement, and it's at paragraph 38.
Okay.
I think we need to have it on screen because I'm just going to read the one sentence. The post office, on the other hand, is caught in this awkward halfway house where it is given only enough to exist in a state of permanent starvation. Right? Those are, if I may say so, very powerful words. If it is to continue to exist in a state of permanent starvation, can it exist at all?
Yes, it can exist in that state. I don't think that that is what is best for the post office. But in order for this to change, I think what we ask the post office to do and how we ask it to do it will need to change. It may be the case that in order to save money in the future, a lot more needs to be given right now. But it is also the case, as I saw when I looked at NBIT, I did not think that what the post office was doing with that IT program was value for money. So there are things going wrong on both sides. I'm not sure that the way that the post office commissioned and carried out the delivery of that IT program was done properly, which would justify the Treasury believing that it shouldn't just be given more money if it is not spending it judiciously. However, I do know that the way that government works in terms of providing money, those one-year spending review settlements where we decide what we're giving to education and what we're giving to the NHS, making a decision about what the post office gets when you're deciding how much we're going to fund health, the post office will always lose that battle. If you are deciding what's going to happen to children, what's going to happen to sick people, oh, and here's the post office will always lose. We need to find a different way of making those decisions.
Right. So can I take it that you agree with that which Mr. Reynolds told me this morning, that despite all its problems, it's still worth saving the post office?
Yes, I absolutely do agree with that. The challenge is where we find the money.
Yeah, sure.
And making sure the government has the money to do so is absolutely key. It's a different question entirely, but should we have a post office? Yes, I think it is a cultural institution that's absolutely essential for us to keep, and I support it wholeheartedly.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Ms. Badenoch, for giving evidence to me. Well, I think it's all been this afternoon, albeit it started before lunch. So thank you for taking the time to come to the inquiry, and thank you for making 2 witness statements.
Thank you, Sir Wynne.
Right, so we'll now have our break, and can I tell everyone that my cut-off point this afternoon has to be 5 o'clock, so I urge Council to agree between them how we manage that time.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Blake will have heard that. 335, please.
Yeah, fine.
Good afternoon, sir. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This afternoon, we're going to hear from Mr. Patterson.
Yeah.
If you could hold that and repeat after me, please. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, basically.
Thank you very much. Can you give your full name, please?
William Paul Patterson.
Thank you. Mr. Patterson, you have previously appeared at this inquiry. You have produced 5 witness statements. The second and third witness statement, you have already confirmed the truth of their content, but I'd just like to address all of them at once, please. The first witness statement, it doesn't need to be brought up onto screen, is WITN 066501000, dated the 28th of September 2022. That related to Phase 2. The second witness statement is FUJ 001260035, dated the 29th of December 2022. That related to Phase 3. The third witness statement, that's WITN 066503000, dated the 14th of September 2023. That relates to Phase 4. The fourth witness statement, WITN 066504000, dated the 8th of August 2024, relates to phases 5 and 6. And finally, the fifth witness statement, WITN 066505000, dated the 23rd of September 2024, relates to phase 7. Can you confirm that you have copies of those in front of you, and in respect of those which you haven't already addressed, so that's the first, the fourth and the fifth statements, that you can see your signature on those statements?
Yes, I can, Mr. Blake.
And can you confirm that all of those statements are true to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, they are.
Thank you very much. All of those statements, or the ones that haven't yet been published, will be published on the inquiry's website. As I've said, you have previously given evidence to this inquiry, and you have been called back today to principally address 2 issues. The first is the current state of Horizon and the use of Horizon in respect of actions against sub-postmasters, and the second is the issue of redress or compensation. As we established last time, you are the Director of Fujitsu Services Limited, is that correct?
Yes.
And the Executive Vice President and Chief Executive Officer of the Europe region.
Yes.
You joined Fujitsu, I think, in 2010, is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you very much. If we could then bring onto screen your fifth statement, that's WITN 066505000. Thank you very much. And could we please look at page 6 of that statement? And it's paragraph 14 that I'd like to ask you about. You say at paragraph 14, Fujitsu accepts that there have been failures to meet the standards expected. Can you assist us with what specifically those failures are, so far as Fujitsu is concerned?
So I think I cover a number of the topics inside the statement, but as I reflect on my previous evidence as well, the prosecutory support clauses in the contract meant that we put too much focus on the clauses in the contract rather than on the impacts on the sub-postmasters. I think there was a second topic for me, which is about the support of our employees when they flagged up concerns. And my third issue was around the whole industrialisation of witness statements, which I thought was and we think is completely inappropriate.
Page 27, paragraph 72, you've said that there is still substantial work to be done. Is it your view that the failings, insofar as Fujitsu are concerned, were substantial?
Well, the 3 examples I've just given you, I think they are substantial, and they resulted and they contributed to a miscarriage of justice on an enormous scale. So yes, I think they were substantive.
I won't be going into the detailed evidence. We won't be looking at the who, what, where, when, how. But it's important to understand Fujitsu's corporate position on what it accepts. I just want to see in respect of 3 propositions. The first is, does Fujitsu accept that it provided a witness or witnesses in criminal proceedings who provided evidence that was, at a minimum, incomplete or otherwise should not have been relied upon?
So I'm not a lawyer, Mr. Blake. So my reading of the evidence and what was submitted, I think they were exactly as you just described.
Thank you. Second of all, does Fujitsu accept that it provided audit data, ARQ data, that was at certain points also unreliable?
Yes.
Third, does Fujitsu accept that there have been occasions in the context of enforcement action against sub-postmasters where information that was provided by Fujitsu was unreliable, inaccurate, or otherwise incomplete?
So I don't know about all the cases. I'm not familiar with all the cases and where witness statements were given. But I think there is a general theme, which was they were, and I seem to recall in evidence, witness statements being edited and being adjusted by post office lawyers. So I think there was a number of those areas where they were inaccurate, incomplete. Yes.
Thank you. Moving on then to the current position and the current operation of Horizon, could we please bring up onto screen the expert report from YouGov, that's EXPG 607, maybe 707. Thank you very much. Could we please turn to page 17? As you're aware, this YouGov report is based on responses from approaching 1,000 current sub-postmasters. Have you read this report?
Yes, I have.
Looking at page 17, we saw there that the net dissatisfaction in respect of how Horizon currently operates is a clear majority of those as between those dissatisfied and those satisfied. We have 49% net dissatisfied. If we could turn over the page, please. Thank you. It says there the vast majority, that's 92% of sub-postmasters surveyed, reported experiencing some form of issues with the Horizon IT system in the last 12 months. It gives an example, if we scroll down, of an open-ended comment. In my opinion, Horizon is still flawed. I regularly have unexplained discrepancies, often altering daily or manifesting at balance. If we scroll over the page, we have the list there at figure 8 of issues experienced within the last 12 months. Unexplained discrepancies, 57% of those who responded said that they had experienced unexplained discrepancies with Horizon in the past 12 months. We have there unexplained transactions, 19%, missing transactions, 14%, double entry of transactions, 10%. Do you have any reason to doubt those figures or experiences of the sub-postmasters?
So when I look at this report, and I had my team try and decode it, my concern is the term Horizon has been used to cover everything inside the post office's complete supply chain. So if you are sub-postmasters, this is exactly the view you would get, because you will look on your screen and these are some of the problems or discrepancies or issues that they are experiencing. So it is absolutely correct from their experience. But screen freezes could be caused by multiple things. The post office has its network provided by a third party. Issues with pin pads have nothing to do with the Horizon system. They are provided for and maintained by another organisation. And when I listened to Melanie Park's, I think, evidence around discrepancies and innocent, actually, in some cases, innocent double keying or whatever, all of that told me that these things need to be properly investigated, not to rely on a very narrow definition of Horizon or a very narrow definition of where a problem would be.
Do you think that the system that is provided by Fujitsu could be, at least in some part, to explain for those unexplained discrepancies unexplained transactions, missing transactions.
So Fujitsu has been clear all the way along. There continues to be bugs, errors and defects. There continues to be end of life. This application, the Horizon application, as I think was covered in the witness statements earlier today, is end of life. It was meant to be end of life some years ago, and a new system was meant to be in play. So all of those things are correct, and could be or could not be causing those problems, which again is why I made the point a moment ago. Any accusation to a sub-postmaster needs to be properly investigated and not rely on one data point.
Perhaps we can see your reflections in respect of the end-of-life situation. Could we please turn to FUJ 00243299, please? It's correspondence that the inquiry has seen from the 15th of December of 2023 to Mr. Brocklesby, and it relates to the extension of the contract. I'll just read to you a few passages. At paragraph 1 there, if we scroll down, it says, the risks associated with the continued provision of the Horizon system, including the audit archive on an end-of-life IT infrastructure. Understandably, Post Office has historically been strategically focused on alternative solutions to Horizon rather than investing in the existing infrastructure. Due to the age and consequent end-of-life status of the underpinning Horizon infrastructure, there is an increasing risk of failure of the infrastructure that could result in adverse impact in the delivery of services to the public. Is that one of the points that you were just making, that as time goes on, the end-of-life status means that there is an increasing risk of failure?
There is an enormous increasing risk. The Post Office have rightly been focused on their other suppliers and building their new system, and Horizon application was meant to have been retired. So they put their efforts and focus, understandably, into the new world and not into the old world. To give this some context, we have not turned off some of this equipment because it is so old.
Another challenge to the feasibility and continued delivery of the Horizon system, number 2, is the technical complexity and risk associated with updating infrastructure at various states of obsolescence and compatibility, and to delivering new system requirements, including because of lessons learned and commitments to end users. These activities are increasingly risky and technically challenging, given the end of service life Horizon system noted in paragraph 1. So those are the challenges in respect to making changes to the Horizon system going forward.
Yes, and as I mentioned a moment ago, the Horizon application is one of many applications which are all interconnected inside the Post Office's supply chain. When you change one part, you need to make sure that it connects with Credence, with Polsat, with all the other systems that the Post Office uses directly and with other third parties. When something is this old and you make that change, it has consequential impacts on all of those other systems, which you need to be super careful about.
We're going to look at some of the correspondence between yourself and the Post Office, Mr. Reid, in due course, but could we just quickly go through a few of those letters, a few lines in a few of those letters. If we start with FUJ 00243204, it's a letter that we've already seen in great depth of the 8th of July 2024 between yourself and Nick Reid. As I said, we'll come to the context of these letters. But if we scroll down, there's only one passage that I'd like to draw your attention to. It says there, as the Post Office is well aware, there have been and there continue to be bugs, errors and defects in the Horizon system. Further, Fujitsu currently has and previously had access to branch transaction records. 2 points you're highlighting there. One is bugs, errors and defects. The other is what has come to be known as remote access. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Could we please then turn to FUJ 00243303, a further letter of the 23rd of August. This one is to an investigator at the City of London Police. If we could scroll down the first page, please. under A, it says, as discussed, the Horizon system has had and continues to have bugs, errors and defects, some of which may not have been detected at this time. So not only an acceptance that the current system has bugs, errors and defects, but also there are effectively unknowns.
Yes, but I think the second sentence is also important, which is the Horizon application is fed from other third-party systems and business processes. So as well as Horizon may well have unknown, I cannot attest to the validity or the performance of those other systems.
Thank you very much. That letter can come down and we'll return to it shortly. Are we to understand from that correspondence and from your evidence that there are currently reliability issues with the Horizon system?
So the Horizon system, as far as I understand today, is performing to its contractual performance levels in terms of its SLAs. Last week I got an update on where we are with bugs, errors and defects. There are currently 16, and we have patches, which is the technical term for the fixes, cited to go in February after the Christmas peak. So I think there is good understanding of where there are bugs, errors and defects, and a process which is well communicated with the Post Office. There is a weekly session with the Post Office, and we're told they communicate that to the sub-postmasters. But there will continue to be, Mr. Blake, with changes and with age, bugs, errors and defects that may well arise.
Does the system that Fujitsu provides operate in a way, and I'm going to use the language of a letter from Ernst & Young that we saw in phase 2 of this inquiry. It's a 1999 letter. Does it operate in a way that would allow sub-postmasters to produce their accounts to a suitable degree of integrity?
I couldn't answer that question.
Do you consider it to be sufficiently reliable for sub-postmasters to produce their accounts?
So, Mr. Blake, you're asking me to comment on audit and accounting processes which I don't have any professional understanding on. What I can say is that the system today performs to the SLAs that the Post Office require us to do, to perform to. I can't comment on whether that document that's produced at the back and what's its contents, or whether it's appropriate for them to legally sign off. That would be massively overstepping my capability.
The Horizon...
Sorry, Mr. Patterson, I've forgotten what SLA stands for.
Oh, forgive me, service level agreements.
Sorry, yeah, fine.
Sub-postmasters up and down the country use a system that is... The fundamentals are provided by Fujitsu. Does that system, as far as you are aware, is it sufficient to produce reliable accounts?
So I think in all the evidence that we've seen and all the inquiry we've seen, the reporting that comes out of Horizon, whether it's appropriate or not, may have bugs, errors and defects, may have been fed bugs, errors and defects, may not be reflecting the accuracy of what's gone on in the sub-postmaster's branch. What is the document that's required by the Post Office signed off by the sub-postmaster? I have no idea.
Not the Post Office. I mean, the taxman, for example.
I have no idea, Mr. Blake. I've never seen one of those documents about what would be presented to an accountant or to the HMRC. I don't believe it's in my evidence.
Are you confident, for example, that somebody could come to the inquiry from Horizon, from Fujitsu, and say, where you're sitting, that as somebody who operates Horizon, and of course individual cases have to be taken on their own basis and their own facts, but as somebody who operates Horizon, the system, so far as they are concerned, is reliable for accounting purposes?
Mr. Blake, I'm going to answer it. I don't know. If that question was being posed, I would expect the Post Office to be sitting here as well as the engineers on our side, to determine whether the information required is appropriate to be able to sign those things off. It's very clear. It's very clear. Forgive me. It's very clear in all the evidence in this inquiry that there is a level of unreliability and unreliability. I've said it at the start of this particular evidence around bugs, errors and defects, and the whole end-to-end. Horizon, in some respects, represents the end-to-end of what goes on inside a sub-postmaster's branch and what happens in post office, head office. So for me to sit here and say I think there's enough in that documentation to allow HMRC or an accountant to sign off, I am not qualified to answer that, and neither are my colleagues.
Mr. Patterson, you are presumably somebody who goes up and down the country bidding for contracts. If you were selling Horizon as a new system, would you be able to tell the person who you are selling that system to that at the end of the day, the accounts that it produces are reliable?
So we do not sell this system. This system is end of life. At the Public Accounts Committee, when I gave evidence, this is not a product that we've ever sold to another customer. It is bespoke to the post office, and it's bespoke to the post office's requirements. So again, I would ask that would be a question I would be asking the post office: is the documentation and the material that comes out of it reflecting of what is required?
Can you see how that is an issue if you're a current sub-postmaster who operates that system, who produces accounts, who relies on the system day in, day out, that the head of the company in Europe who produces that system can't say that what's coming out of it is reliable?
So I'll give you a slightly different example. If in a cash pouch a sub-postmaster inadvertently puts in 2 extra zeros and that cash pouch gets to the other end of the line and it doesn't have those 2 extra zeros of money, that's a discrepancy. Horizon has just reported what was keyed in on one end and what was counted at the other end. So forgive me, do I then say that the Horizon system is accurate? Well, in that example, I can't say that because I don't know what's going on.
Are we again repeating the words user error?
No, far from it. I use that as an example. Please forgive me, Mr. Bake. Please forgive me. I am very respectful for the sub-postmasters and what they've gone through.
So all I'm asking about is not the individual user making an error. I'm purely asking about the system that you provide.
Well, I'll take it away from being a user. Does the PulseApp system feed into the Horizon system correctly? I don't know the answer to that.
That's a third-party system.
But Horizon reflects all of that, and that's the transactions, in fairness to the sub-postmaster, that he or she are representing. So which is why we've been consistent since the very start of the inquiry that there have been bugs, errors and defects. There will continue to be unreliability in the front end, and in the rest of the supply chain, I do not know the answer to that. Which is why, when we get to the next set of questions, we've been so keen to make sure that investigations take in the entire system and don't rely on a very narrow point of view.
And let's move to that correspondence. If we start with FUJ 00243157. If we start, please, on page 4. Thank you. This is an email exchange. You'll be familiar with. The inquiry is familiar with it. It relates to a City of London police investigation in April of this year. And Simon Oldnell of the Post Office says, can I ask that you help with any conversations that City of London Police need to have with Fujitsu Services Limited? If we scroll over the page, please, to page 3. The response from Mr. Walton of Fujitsu is, as this is a legal matter, Fujitsu Legal are communicating with the City of London Police. I'm not involved in those communications, and in any event, Fujitsu considers it to be inappropriate for Post Office and Fujitsu to be discussing a police investigation. If we go to page 2, please. If we scroll down, we can see this is an email we saw with Mr. Bartlett. He says, City of London Police has informed us that they've not had any additional information or contact with Fujitsu after the single exploratory and inconclusive conversation. They left that conversation with the feeling that they were indirectly being told that the Horizon system was unreliable, and so the case could not progress. We really need to explore this, as this is not the nuanced impression Simon Oldnell has given me. As the potential victim in this case, the Post Office would be grateful if you could provide me with contact details for either the equivalent person in Fujitsu to my role or an appropriate person in your legal team. I will then pass those details on to the City of London Police, who are looking to have a trilateral conversation with Fujitsu, Post Office and City of London Police. It's impossible to overstate how important this is. I need to advise both the police and the Post Office as to evidentially established reliability or not of data that is being used every day in establishing outcomes with postmasters and potentially to be presented to the criminal justice system by the police and the 3 public prosecuting agencies. The non-provision of relevant witness statements from the Post Office and Fujitsu will rightly be interpreted by the police and prosecutors as Post Office and Fujitsu not having faith in the reliability of the data, with the obvious outcome resulting. If we go on to page 1, please. We see there the response from the solicitor for Fujitsu's legal team saying, please refer any correspondence to me rather than Mr. Walton. I note your comments, which aren't accepted. It's not appropriate for Fujitsu to discuss with Post Office the nature and substance of its cooperation with an ongoing police investigation. And if we scroll up to the top, we have there Mr. Bartlett's response. We've had a call with City of London Police following your email below, and they will be in touch with you again to arrange the taking of a witness statement or statements. We would be grateful for Fujitsu to extend any and all assistance to City of London Police to aid their objective understanding and assessment as the reliability of the Horizon system and the admissibility of evidence produced from it relating to the investigation they are conducting following Post Office making a crime report to them as a potential victim. As we've seen, that then sparks a number of letters between yourself and Mr. Reid. I'll take them as quickly as we can. If we start, please, at FUJ 00243-199. We have there the letter of the 17th of May, where in the first paragraph you explain serious concerns. You say, to be clear, Fujitsu will not support the Post Office to act against postmasters. We will not provide the support for any enforcement actions taken by the Post Office against postmasters, whether civil or criminal, for alleged shortfalls, fraud, or false accounting. And then you address each one of them. Criminal investigations, you refer to that City of London Police investigation, and you say, the approach of Fujitsu is to cooperate with the police and any other third party exercising independent investigative, prosecutorial, regulatory or judicial powers. However, we are concerned by the behaviour of the Post Office investigation team on this matter, and you address the concern there relating to, for example, reference to the Post Office being a victim, and that's something we have already addressed. The second, in relation to the pursuit of shortfalls from sub-postmasters, you say it seems that the Post Office may be continuing to pursue postmasters for shortfalls in their accounts, but we would have expected the Post Office has changed its behaviour. It shouldn't essentially be relying on Horizon data as a basis for that enforcement. You then address the issue of redress and say that you will continue to provide data in relation to redress. Sorry, before I get to a question, I'll just quickly take you through 2 more letters. The first is FUJ 00243-201. This is the response from Mr. Reid. Thank you very much. At the bottom of the page, he reassures you that the Post Office won't be undertaking their own prosecutions. He explains over the page, please. The Post Office requests the use of Horizon data for a number of day-to-day business reasons, including supporting postmasters with their branches. In terms of enforcement, the Post Office's requests only relate to cases where our teams are supporting criminal investigations or prosecutions pursued by independent third parties. He says, in response to the specific case you raised, potential criminal activities were identified in the branch, and Post Office therefore reported the matter to police. We have assisted with the police's investigation, including providing supporting data. He says, naturally, it's vital for the police's investigation that it can rely on the Horizon data that it has received. In respect of shortfalls, he says that Horizon data isn't currently being used, but the Post Office data for a range of key day-to-day business activities, including supporting its postmasters with resolving discrepancies on their accounts, it is necessary to have your assistance. If we go over the page, please. He says there, Post Office sees reliance on Horizon data as essential to supporting postmasters with understanding and remediating discrepancies. Post Office relies on Fujitsu and the services it provides to ensure that it can continue to support postmasters in that way. And then finally, he addresses the same topic, redress. The final document before I ask the question is at FUJ 00243204. And this is your response of the 8th of July, and I'll take that slightly more slowly. If we scroll down, please, you say there, in simple terms, the Post Office is requesting that Fujitsu give expert opinion evidence to be used in criminal proceedings against postmasters and post office workers. You say, in your letter, you rightly note that the content of any witness statement is a matter between the police and Fujitsu. However, I consider it necessary to address this issue with you because the request was made by Post Office and because I consider the request to be entirely inappropriate, particularly in the light of the evidence being uncovered at the inquiry. I enclose with this letter an email chain, and you refer to that email chain that we saw. You say a witness statement from Fujitsu attesting to the reliability of the Horizon system and of data from it in criminal proceedings would amount to expert opinion evidence. Fujitsu is incapable of providing expert opinion evidence as it is neither independent nor has it sufficient information to provide such an opinion. Now, you're not a lawyer, and I'm not asking you for a legal answer to this question. But why do you understand Fujitsu couldn't provide a witness statement, not purporting to be an independent witness statement, not purporting to be an independent expert, but just simply evidence of the personal experience of the author in respect of the reliability with whatever caveats it may require?
So first of all, we are actively supporting the police in their inquiries. There's evidence, I think, in the pack, in the bundle, excuse me, of a comprehensive set of correspondence with the police, drawing their attention to a number of areas directly from this inquiry. A witness statement from us on what comes out of the Horizon application is still a problem to us for exactly the reasons I said earlier, because the Horizon system is one lens on the entire supply chain in the Post Office, and we can't attest to everything that goes on in that from left to right. My other concern about the email from Mr. Bartlett was just trying to narrow things down. So as I've tried to pay close attention to this inquiry, one of the topics came up was people flagging things. Did executive flag things? Were we being transparent? Were we being curious? This is Fujitsu trying to be very transparent, very curious around what has gone on and what is going on day to day. So that was why we didn't feel like we could give a witness statement, but the material that we're given to the police at the moment, and I don't know the state of those cases, may still require us to give that in due course, Mr. Blake, but at this point in time we felt we couldn't.
In the email chain it explained from the Post Office's perspective that they considered that the police had been given the impression that the system was unreliable. Mm-hmm. And that may in fact be consistent with the evidence that you've given to the inquiry today. But is there not some way in which Fujitsu could provide a statement that at least speaks about its own system that it operates, subject to the caveats of the third parties, that goes to in some way reassure the police in respect of the current reliability of the system?
Again, what I've learned and what our company has learned from the inquiry in its earlier stages is just these very narrow, containing questions. Was this correct at this point in time from 9 o'clock to 4 o'clock? We feel that's completely inappropriate. I think the evidence during this inquiry suggests that that's also inappropriate. You need to take a holistic view, and in fairness to the sub-postmasters, that's what they need as well. They need to see the whole system that they are engaging with, not just a window which is Horizon, but all the other parts of the components. It is impossible for Fujitsu, even with all those caveats. The other thing I've learned about caveats is nobody reads them, and people only then pick out the paragraph they want to pick out. That was one of your first questions to me. So that is why we felt we couldn't. Now, evidence may well transpire. You know, there's a number of other cases going through. I think there's 33 prosecutions which the police are looking into at the moment. We are only aware of 4. So again, this point of transparency, and we were aware of none before January, February when we got that email. So everything was silent to us, and then suddenly we get these 2 bequests, which made us very suspicious, very curious, hence why I wrote to Mr. Reid.
The next paragraph, I think I may have referred you to this already. It says, as the Post Office is well aware, there have been and there continue to be bugs, errors and defects in the Horizon system. Further, Fujitsu currently has and previously had access to branch transaction records. You also say, in addition to Fujitsu, the Horizon system is reliant on the delivery of services by Post Office and third parties retained by the Post Office, and that's the point you've also made today. If we scroll over the page, please. It says, based on the evidence which has been seen and heard in the Post Office Horizon IT inquiry, Fujitsu considers that all of the matters mentioned above would need to be investigated carefully by the Post Office and the police with the assistance of an independent technical IT expert and possibly also a forensic accounting expert to ascertain proper explanations for branch account discrepancies. Fujitsu considers that only after such an investigation has been undertaken could a meaningful expert witness statement be made in subsequent criminal proceedings, which addresses the reliability of the Horizon system and the relevant data produced. For the reasons I've mentioned above, Fujitsu cannot provide such a statement. Putting a statement to one side, what about an independent investigation into the reliability of the system? We've heard evidence that the Post Office are looking for some sort of independent statement from an IT expert. In respect of their investigation, do you commit to fully cooperating, opening up your books, your warehouses, your data to an expert for that purpose?
I think anything that helps the sub-postmasters in the entire end-to-end being confident about the systems that they are using, I welcome. Fujitsu would welcome. Yeah, I have no problem with that at all.
And in respect of opening up your books to that expert so that they can work out for themselves the reliability of the system.
Indeed, and I think, you know, back to the earlier comment, this is a complex environment which is in parts 25 years old. And we are applying today's, you know, computing standards to some of those things. So I think it will be difficult, hence why the system is end of life, hence why it should not be being extended, hence why it should have been replaced. So I have no problem at all in opening up to any analysis that a third party would wish to do.
Has Fujitsu had an independent company report on the current reliability of the Horizon system?
Now, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer to that, Mr. Blake.
We've seen some evidence, for example, back in 2012, that Fujitsu were going to obtain a KPMG report. I think it was stopped in light of the second site report. Is that your understanding, or do you have a different understanding?
I don't have much understanding. I saw that document in my bundle, and I don't have an opinion why it was stopped or didn't go ahead. I read the email traffic and...
Focusing on the present, though, people may be interested in why the burden is being placed on the Post Office to obtain that independent report, why it is that Fujitsu themselves, in the time that's been available, haven't commissioned an external investigation into the reliability of a system that they produce.
So I think, again, it's about we're expanding what the system is and that definition of what the Horizon application is. There are multiple things in this supply chain which Horizon touches or is fed with. I think it's right and proper that that whole system end-to-end is examined, not just a Horizon application. Which is, and whether we should be partly funding that or doing it, I think that's perfectly sensible for us to have that conversation with the Post Office. Why we haven't done that in the past? Well, frankly, it's been end of life. We're not meant to be maintaining this system, and in fact, we have not been doing any material investment in it, or the Post Office haven't, for several years. And I'm sure we'll come on to that question in a moment.
I'll take you to how this correspondence with the Post Office ends. And we can start with FUJ 002432009. 23rd of July 2024 response from Owen Woodley. I won't go into the detail. If we scroll down, we can see that he says he shares your commitment. Post Office has unquestionably changed its mindset. Post Office will never again take a prosecutorial role. He addresses the question of expert evidence. He says, as you rightly say, Fujitsu is not able to provide expert opinion evidence, and it's not sufficiently independent for any statements that it may provide to be deemed expert evidence by the Crown Prosecution Service. Post Office is aware that it has not and would not request that Fujitsu provides expert opinion evidence. If we scroll over, he then says in that top paragraph, about halfway through, he says the police have raised questions regarding the data and the Horizon system, and the investigations, it's the ACNI, I think it's A and CI team, referred the police to Fujitsu as the Post Office's provider of the system to obtain answers to those questions. The feedback they received in April 2024 was that the police had only been able to have one conversation with Fujitsu at that time, and the investigation officer's impression from the conversation was that they were indirectly being told by Fujitsu that the Horizon system was unreliable. As a result, the police told the team that the investigation could not progress. In light of the feedback from the police, Mr. Bartlett sent the email, and he's explaining the background to the email and why it was sent. He's not asking Fujitsu to act as an independent expert witness in this case. He asked that Fujitsu engage with the police and provide a statement when requested to do so by the police regarding the reliability of the data, which was informing the police's investigation. I understand from your previous correspondence that Fujitsu has confirmed it will engage further with the police in this matter. He then goes on to address criminal investigations and prosecutions. If we go over the page, please. He says to get the right checks and balances in any of these investigations processes, data will be required from the Horizon system, along with analysis of any known bugs, errors, or defects. He then addresses the victim point. He moves on to postmaster shortfalls. Thank you for confirming Fujitsu will continue to deliver its contractual obligations, including reporting promptly and transparently on branch impacting incidents. While the Post Office does not currently take civil recovery action to recover established losses from postmasters, this may be necessary in future to establish a fair, transparent and consistent approach to recoveries. So he's referring there to potential actions to recover apparent shortfalls. He says, I welcome your commitment that Fujitsu will work collaboratively with the Post Office over the coming months so that together we can achieve the best outcome for postmasters, and your offer to work collaboratively on the future of the Horizon system is much appreciated. We then turn to your response. It's FUJ 002432211. A response dated the 26th of July of this year. And you say, It is unfortunate that Nick, that's Nick Reed, was not able to attend the meeting as discussed. The original purpose of writing to Nick was to escalate CEO to CEO the concerns relating to certain behaviours within the post office. It seems clear that the post office continues to have significant cultural issues, sees itself as a victim, with the enforcement and prosecution of postmasters considered as business as usual activity of a commercial retail company. As I stated in my correspondence to Nick, and during our discussion, Fujitsu finds the language and the suggested behaviour unacceptable from post office investigators. I do not intend to engage further with the post office on the matters I raised. We completely trust in Sir Win and the inquiry process, which will examine the extent of the post office's change in phase 7. It might be suggested that that is a rather petulant response to a serious letter from the post office. So what is your view on that?
It's not petulant at all, and I also heard a term being used, it was schoolboy playground things. I take all of this matter personally really, really seriously, so seriously, which is why I wrote to Nick Reed. Because as I said earlier, I've learned in the evidence in this inquiry too much or lack of transparency, lack of clarity, lack of curiosity on a very, very complex set of material and environments. So it's not petulant at all. I felt it was really serious, particularly when I'm contacted as a company by the police, accusing sub-postmasters of very serious offences. And given what I have heard in this inquiry, I felt it was really important that I lay out clearly that we will not be supporting the post office. However, Mr. Blake, we are actively supporting the police in those inquiries. I know it's also come up in this inquiry whether we are or not. I think you've seen some of the material. They are very comprehensive. I saw some material this morning also on this very matter with the police. So we are actively supporting the police and sharing with them all the material that we've got, as well as the material, obviously, from this inquiry.
And what about that second paragraph, though? I do not intend to engage further with the post office on the matters I raised. Why was it in this summer you couldn't say to the post office, of course we'll supply to the police whatever witness statement they ask for?
So in our statement to the Select Committee in 2020, we made it clear in that we will continue to support the police in their investigations. It's in my corporate statement here. I think on the back paragraphs, we will continue to support the police in any investigations. I felt there's been a number of changes in the executive team in the post office. I met Nick early on when we were both appointed. I've now met Mr. Woodley. I've now met their new acting CEOs as well. And one of my other concerns, you would have seen in my notes, was just about the continuity of that understanding, about how serious Fujitsu takes this matter. And therefore, I wasn't going to engage any further with the post office, but would with the police.
Does that in some way signify a quite serious breakdown in the relationship between Fujitsu and the post office?
So operationally, we are very well engaged and delivering against our contract to the post office. On Friday evening, I spoke to 2 executives from the post office about their request on an extension. So we continue to focus on the day-to-day and what needs to be done. But on this particular matter about prosecutions, I will not engage with the post office. We will not engage with the post office on it.
Right. I understand that, Mr. Patterson. Let me just ask you this. As we are talking to each other now, how many, if not exactly, approximately, cases are you, and I'm using these words completely neutrally, having correspondence or discussions with the police?
4.
4, right. In those 4 cases, to the best of your knowledge and belief, has Fujitsu answered the questions or tried to answer the questions that the police have posed to them?
Yes, Sir Win. In fact, one of the documents was 33 pages laying out the answers to those questions.
Hang on. That's fine. in those 4 cases, if the police has asked for documentary material, has it been provided?
Yes.
If the police have asked for data from Horizon, has that been provided?
No, I don't know whether they have asked for that yet, Sir
Well,
Reid.
I'm not, if they haven't, that's fine.
But if they do, absolutely.
Right. And in any of the cases to date, has the police asked Fujitsu to nominate a person to make a witness statement?
I don't believe so.
Right. And so far as you are aware, if the police made such a request of Fujitsu, would you at least try to find a person who could make a witness statement?
Absolutely, Sir Reid. Absolutely.
Right. Fine. Okay. So that's the current position. Right. Back to you, Mr. Blake.
Thank you very much, sir. We'll move on then to the extension of the contract. Could we bring back onto screen your 5th witness statement at page 30, please? And it's paragraph 77. Thank you. Page 30, paragraph 77. You say there, as noted above, the Horizon contract is due to end on the 31st of March 2025. However, in the event that it is not possible, Fujitsu is currently discussing with the Post Office, at its request, the potential for a short-term extension, which the Post Office envisages to be approximately 2 years, to facilitate an orderly exit and transition to occur. In light of the evidence that has emerged in the inquiry in relation to the Post Office's conduct and culture, and the challenges that Fujitsu has faced with regard to visibility over the Post Office's use of Horizon data and/or records, Fujitsu's position will be that any extension to the Horizon contract should necessarily see the removal of the court case support services provisions. Can you assist us with what you mean by the court case services provisions?
So I don't have all the clauses in my head, but there is a set of responsibilities placed on Fujitsu back when this contract was agreed in 1999, which had a number of activities and responsibilities. Fujitsu will not sign any extension if those conditions are still in the contract.
Are you able to assist us with whether Fujitsu will be able to assist the Post Office in respect of the investigations of shortfalls? Putting aside historic criminal matters, in respect of current shortfalls experienced by postmasters.
So I think I also say in here somewhere about the ARQ data is moving to, so all the historical data will be under the Post Office's control. And in fact, when I was talking to Mr. Railton a few weeks ago, that was very important to him. So I think actually the Post Office by early February will have all of the data inside their own control to support any investigations that they wish to do.
And in respect of matters after February, so let's say in a year's time, there needs to be an investigation into a shortfall. Is that something that you will be assisting the Post Office on or not?
Yes, I would expect those types of operational engagements to continue. And I think they are quite different in tone to court case support services and my very earlier comment around the industrialisation of witness statements.
Thank you. We've seen in other documents the discussion of potentially a 5-year extension, 5 more years of Horizon. Would it be possible, in light of what you've said, to improve the reliability of Horizon data over that time, or do you anticipate that, in fact, it may get worse over that time?
So the first correspondence, I think, was December, where the request for 5 years. In my meeting with the acting CEO at the time, Owen Woodley, I think the request was 2 years. We've had a request for 3 years. And this morning, as I walked into this building, I had another request which was for 4 years. So this continues to move around in terms of what the requirements are from the Post Office. I am encouraged by the new leaders who seem to be getting more understanding and clarity around what the actual business requirements from the Horizon system will be. But to your question, I am very worried about it. And in fact, my correspondence and my commentary to them as well is it needs to be the shortest possible time entirely, because this system is not meant to be continuing, and it's not had any material investments in the last 4 years while the attention has been on NBIT or versions of NBIT. My earlier comment also around Horizon is one part, this application is one part of an complete supply chain, and in fairness to the post office, that means it's going to have multiple tests of all their other systems as well. So if you change one part, you have to test everything else. So I think it's very, very difficult to know whether 3 years, 4 years or 5 years will be required, will be possible, to your question.
Thank you. I want to look at current use of Horizon data. If we could bring back onto screen your witness statement, WITN 066505000, page 25, paragraph 66. Thank you. It's the bottom of page 25. You say there, Fujitsu continues to provide the post office with Horizon data, including ARQ data, when requested as part of its provision of services related to the Horizon system. Over the page, please. While Fujitsu has informed the post office that it will not provide support for enforcement actions taken against postmasters, whether civil or criminal, Fujitsu has struggled to verify the purpose to which the post office intends to put the data, or what the data is in fact used for. Can you assist us with what you mean by struggle to verify the purpose?
So I think it came up in some of the post office executives' evidence as well. So one of the things that we are very concerned about, again, this narrow use of information, is information being requested and used for, in the concern here, for prosecutions. And what we were asking for, and what we did on a very simple form, which is an ARQ form, is could you tick a box to say, is it used for redress or management information or for prosecution? The post office felt that was inappropriate and didn't accept that change. But that was the reason for the change. And if I go back to what Fujitsu has learned through this inquiry, it's that curiosity topic again. You know, what is the data being used for, rather than just handing over the data without any context to it.
Perhaps you could bring onto screen the forms, the new form and the old form, FUJ 002432213. If it's possible to bring that on screen alongside FUJ 002432227. Is this the ARQ form that you were referring to?
Yes, I think it is. So I think it is, yes.
And if we have a look at the one now on the left-hand side, there are two additional questions there that are said to be mandatory. The first asks, is this request related to either the investigation of or action being taken or intended to be taken by the post office against a postmaster or post office worker in connection with potential fraud, theft, breach of contract, or any other potential impropriety which is suspected to have occurred at a relevant post office branches. And the second is, will this information be used to support either a postmaster or a post office worker to achieve financial redress? So they are provided with two options. One, presumably, is one that you have absolutely no issue with. The second one, providing information in relation to redress.
Correct.
In respect of the first, what is the position if I were to tick yes?
Well, so the post office have not accepted the change in the form, is my understanding. So we are still reverting to the old ways.
There is another option, at least one more option, isn't there, that the post office might need the data to assist a sub-postmaster in understanding and discussing their current shortfalls. Is that something that is missing in this mandatory section?
So that would be, wouldn't it? Yes, I'd agree with you on that.
There has been, we've seen in an email chain, a dispute between the Post Office and Fujitsu in respect of this new form. Could we please turn to FUJ 002432333? And if we start on page 4, please. Thank you. The bottom of page 3 into page 4. You have somebody from the remediation team. If we scroll down, we can see their name. And it says as follows. It says, please find attached an updated ARQ request tracker with a brief summary of all previous and new requests since our last ARQ request. If we scroll up, we can see a response. At the bottom of page 2, please. Oh, sorry, the bottom of page 3. Thank you. The response there from Fujitsu is, thank you for your recent request. Unfortunately, as it's not on the latest template, we're unable to process it. Please resubmit your request using the attached template. If we scroll up, we can see the response from the remediation team. As you can see below, we again sent our ARQ request to Fujitsu using the older process of master tracker and summary table. It was returned, refusing to complete the request without us completing the updated form. Could you please advise next steps, as we have 10 ARQ requests outstanding? If we scroll up, please. A response further to my earlier emails on this topic, we're now accumulating a backlog of requests, potentially delaying postmaster redress. Can you confirm that Fujitsu will process these requests without further delay? If we turn to page 1, it states as follows. We introduced the updated ARQ form to clarify the intended use of ARQs requested by Post Office. Fujitsu does not accept that the introduction of this amended form has caused delay to redress activities. Since it was introduced, the Post Office has requested over 60 ARQs to support redress activities, and these have been processed in the usual way. As you've now clarified that the ARQs referred to in your email below are intended to be used to support postmaster redress, I will instruct the team to process these received on the previous version of the form, and they will not be subject to additional charges. If we please look again at page 4. I said that the request came from an email address called the remediation team. We see that the requester has the job title or team of Remediation Admin Support Team, Remediation Unit. Has distrust between Fujitsu and the Post Office reached such a level that where somebody from the Remediation Admin Support Team in the Remediation Unit requests ARQ data, they are not trusted to be requesting data for that purpose?
The date of this request, is it the 18th of June?
If we scroll up, yes, 18th of June.
And I think the response from Dan Walton was what?
19th of June.
So 1 day later.
Yes.
Well,
the Daniel Walton email on page 1 is the 21st of June.
So about 4 days later, 3-4 days later. So I don't agree with the premise of the question. I think we're dealing with these matters as speedily as we can do. I think everybody inside Fujitsu is very, very nervous about any documentation, any data that relates to prosecutions or redress. So there's just a natural nervousness. The management team, I think in this example, got to it very quickly. So Simon very quickly flagged it to Dan, and it was dealt with pretty quickly, I would say, in 3-4 days.
That can come down, and I'll move to my very final topic of today, which is compensation and redress. Could we please bring up onto screen RLIT 40276, please? This is an article on the BBC website addressing pay that was received by Fujitsu bosses during the Horizon contract. There is a section on yourself from page 7. If we go down and look at page 8 and into page 9, I'll just read to you a few passages from that report. It refers to yourself, and if we scroll down, it says that you gave evidence last month and is due to do so again later this year. He admitted to the MPs on the Business Select Committee this year that there had been bugs, errors and defects with Horizon from the start and apologised for your firm's role in the scandal. You now face the prospect that Fujitsu may be asked to contribute to the compensation fund for the victims, something he says he has said the firm has a moral obligation to do so. Can you assist us? What do you understand by a moral obligation? Or for what purpose did you use that form of words?
Because a legal process, I think, allows lawyers to spend a lot of time litigating. I think from my standpoint and from my company's standpoint out in Tokyo, we felt it was a moral obligation. Now, when I said that back in January, we've learnt an awful lot in the last several months of this inquiry around what other people and organisations did or didn't do. So I stand by, and the company does stand by. We see ourselves contributing morally to redress to the sub-postmasters.
If we scroll down and over the page, please, it says, quotes your spokesman from Fujitsu to say, based on the findings of the inquiry, we'll also be working with the UK government on the appropriate actions, including contribution to compensation. The Fujitsu group hopes for a swift resolution that ensures a just outcome for the victims. The inquiry's evidence has now effectively come to an end. We have our expert witnesses tomorrow, but that is the end of the final phase of the inquiry. You've had an opportunity, Fujitsu have had an opportunity to hear all of the evidence that's been heard in this inquiry. Having heard that evidence, how are you going to compensate those affected by Fujitsu's failures?
So what we've said all the way through is we expect to contribute to redress. We see that as going through the government, who are the shareholder, and I heard the evidence earlier today. So we see that as being a conversation with government about what our contribution would or would not look like.
And what have you suggested to government that your contribution?
So I have not suggested any particular number. I heard the questions earlier today to the previous Secretary of State, and I think she's used the term gesture. We don't feel that this is a gesture conversation. This is too serious. But we do want to sit down with the government and talk about that frankly and very openly. I thought what Mr. Reynolds said this morning as well would be very helpful to that. I have been in constant contact with the Department of Business and Trade. So the Department of Business and Trade and me and with the Post Office have been in constant communication around one extension and also about evidence or not providing evidence. So I welcome the opportunity to talk to the new Secretary of State in due course.
You outlined at the beginning of your evidence today a number of things that you accepted insofar as Fujitsu's role was concerned. The inquiry is, as I say, coming to the end of its evidence taking. What are you able to say to the inquiry about what you are proposing by way of compensation?
I can't put a number on it, and I think if I reflect on what I've heard from sub-postmasters and the families, there are a number of areas that they need help in, and we would like to sit down with government and figure out how we contribute to that.
Which in particular? What would you like? Let's assume there is a pot of money from Fujitsu. What in particular do you consider Fujitsu should be contributing to?
So I'm not going to put a number on it, Mr. Blake. I think that's
I didn't ask for a number, but just in terms of how it is, there are existing schemes. Is your plan to give the government money towards the redress that has already occurred? Operate a separate fund?
We are not an organisation that can set up new funds or or charities or whatever. We see ourselves contributing to whichever scheme the government and the sub-postmasters agree is the most appropriate one.
Could I please take you to RLIT 0000433? It's the final document that I'll take you to today. This is a recent article in the Financial Times. The headline is Post Office IT Provider Fujitsu won £1.4 million public sector contract since promising to stop bidding. I'll just read you a passage from that if we scroll down, please. It says, after public outcry, Fujitsu said in January that it would voluntarily pause bidding for future public sector contracts while the public inquiry into the scandal was ongoing. However, it did not rule out continuing to bid for work that with existing public sector customers or when the government needed its skills and capability. If we go over the page, please, it says, according to government procurement data provider Tussle, the Japanese group has won 6 public sector contracts worth an estimated total of 1.4 million since making this commitment. 2 of these contracts were awarded as recently as September, and we can see there it sets out below in the tables the various contracts. Can you assist us? To what extent were these existing bids? To what extent is that new work that falls under that caveat that has been provided?
So I believe the MOD is where we have a contractual obligation to provide hardware. So I think that's what that one is about. We have, I think this article talks about 33, there it is at the bottom of the page, 33 public sector contracts. So these are existing contracts that we have obligations within. I think the nuclear laboratory one, they have stated that this is the last, it's a software contract, and they are moving off that software platform, and that was the license for it for the final year, I think it was. So these were existing contracts that we have, where we have contractual obligations to provide those, either the hardware or in this case, software.
And it says in the article that the pause is a voluntary one while the public inquiry was ongoing. How do you see that in the future?
I think in due course we'll sit down with government and discuss it.
Do you intend to resume bids once the inquiry has finished?
No, I don't intend to resume bidding. I think this is a very emotive topic, and we would want to sit down with government and discuss that. We do some things in government, particularly in quite a dangerous area, which we would like to talk to the government about in due course. But I'm not going to say here today that we are going to start bidding for new contracts. We have not done that for the last several months, and my current intention is not to start that tomorrow or the day after.
Thank you. So that brings us to questions from core participants. I think we only have 2 sets of questions, one from Ms. Patrick and one from Mr. Steen. I'm in your hands, sir, as to whether we can complete those today or whether we return tomorrow morning. They've been allocated 1 topic each.
Right. And can I please have as best you can, Mr. Steen and Ms. Patrick, what are you talking about in terms of time?
So I think...
On behalf of that Hammond Co. will be 10 to 15 minutes.
So,
Right.
I apologise, Mr. Steen. So I think we'd be around 5 to 6 minutes.
Right. So it's now 10 to 5, and as you know, my powers of concentration are limited to a normal court day, but I think we're all in agreement that it's better for Mr. Patterson to finish if he possibly can. Is that right? Do you both agree?
Yes, sir.
So yes, there's one difficulty. I'll need to have 2 minutes to speak to Mr. Blake about one particular question.
All right.
So that will take.
So we'll have a 5-minute break. We'll resume at 5 to 5, and we'll finish by 20 past 5.
Thank you, sir.
There?
Thank you very
Yes.
much, sir.
Fine.
Thank you, sir. We're going to hear from Ms. Patrick and then Mr. Steen.
Fine.
Mr. Patterson, good afternoon.
Sorry.
Are you okay?
Yes, indeed. Yes, thank you.
My name's Miss Patrick, and I ask questions on behalf of a number of sub-postmasters who were wrongfully convicted and have since had their convictions quashed. And I only want to raise one topic. When you gave evidence in January, at the end of your evidence, you committed to meeting sub-postmasters and their families. Is that right?
I committed to meeting sub-postmasters and the families contacted me.
Yeah. And in August, early August, 7 months on, you met then with representatives of the children who suffered as a result of their parents being prosecuted and convicted. You're nodding, Mr. Patterson. You have to say yes or
sorry.
no.
Yes, yes.
And in that meeting, there were 9 children of former sub-postmasters, including Katie Downey, Rebecca Foot and Katie Burrows, who sit next to me today. Again, you're nodding. You have to say yes or no for the
yes.
transcript.
I recognise them now. Yes.
Yep. And I think you might be aware that their group is called Lost Chances for Sub-Postmaster Children.
Yes, I am.
And Lost Chances for Postmaster Children affected by the Horizon scandal. They're campaigning for financial support to address chances and opportunities lost, or as they would say, taken from them during their childhood as a result of the experiences of their families. Now, today, perhaps coincidentally or fortuitously, while we raise your contact that you'd had with their group, with the Secretary of State during his evidence, they've had a response from the Post Office to their request for a meeting with them. But you have met their group, haven't you?
Yes, I have.
And during that meeting, they did something that was quite painful for them. They'd written down their stories and they shared, each of them, with you, everything that they had gone through, didn't they?
Yes, they did.
And it was in very moving terms, to be frank, wasn't it?
It was.
They explained that their lost opportunities and their trauma, so it just isn't caught by any existing compensation, redress or restorative justice scheme. Is that fair?
That's my understanding, yes.
And you listened to what they had to say, and that you said you would take it away and you would come back to them.
Yes.
And that's over 3 months ago now, August, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, Hudjo Solicitors has regularly sought updates on their behalf from Fujitsu as to what would happen and when. Is that fair?
I believe so.
And just very briefly, we don't have to go through the detail. In September on the 13th, your solicitors for Fujitsu replied and said that your team were continuing to study what you had learned during your meeting in August. Could you just ask briefly, very briefly, what had you learned in your August meeting?
So I think as your three colleagues, the 3 members of the group sitting beside you, it was a very difficult day for them, and it was a very difficult day to listen. They had a number of ideas, some of which I've got no experience of personally. I don't know in how we would execute those things, and I think I said in the meetings we are not the right people to the right organisation to do some of those things. But let us think about, could we find organisations? But equally, I think the group were also structuring themselves differently to allow us to potentially engage them in a more structured way than the way that it was previously. So we do want to engage in that way. I'm still unclear about what things we can do other than sums of money. The list of, I think the education topic that we talked about, the mental health topic that we talked about, how we can as a company help in that way. And I think there was also a conversation around legacy on education. I think there was I didn't bring my notes with me on that particular meeting. So we still want to do that. Frankly, we've struggled, though, to figure out how.
Can I ask you to pause there for one moment, because I know we're very short of time. The last reply they received, I believe, suggests you would revert with a timetable around engagement towards the end of this year, but that you had no further updates at this time. And that came through Fujitsu solicitors. Does that mean that it will be the end of the year before you can take a position on whether you can engage further with the Lost Chances organisation and with people sitting here. Is that what that means?
So I think there was something else that happened today, which with the Secretary of State, where he also said he thought there was a theme in here or a topic in here that we could be involved in. I don't know what format that engagement with 2 of you, 3 of you, the 9 of you could be before the end of the calendar year. But I won't stay silent. So I won't stay silent.
So you won't stay silent. Can I just ask, you said before the end of the year. Now, given everything that you've said today, and we know what you've said about waiting till the end of the inquiry, given everything you've said today about that meeting and about Fujitsu's role in the scandal, is there really any need for this work, this engagement, to wait till the end of the inquiry to decide where Fujitsu might fit? For us as a company, it's very difficult to understand. When we had the first conversation, very difficult to understand where that engagement could be, what could we do. You had a list of several topics that we think could help with. I think that we'd want to explore those again, not to, I think, in fact, Rebecca, you made the point about kicking the ball down the road. Not to do that, but we struggled, frankly, to find a way to engaging it. Now, I think, if my memory's right, you've also structured yourself slightly differently now, I believe. I owe it to you to have a look at what that new structure looks like, and is there a way that we could engage with before the end of the calendar year? Thank you.
And I don't know off the top of my head what your new structure looks like. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Patterson. There have been updates provided to Fujitsu, and I'm very grateful for your indication that there would be further engagement.
Before Mr. Steen asks you any questions, Mr. Patterson, can I just get clarity about one point? So far as Fujitsu is concerned, does the end of the inquiry for taking steps mean at the close of play on the 17th of December, when the last final oral submissions are made, or does it mean when I report?
I haven't given it, Sewin, any practical thoughts. Actually, I'm hoping once you finish taking all the evidence, we can sit down with government, given that we'll know a number of themes and a number of conclusions, shall we say, given everybody's listened to it. But I hadn't given it a definitive date, sir.
No, well, that's all right. But I would like you to ponder that, because I think everybody will realize that there is bound to be a period of time. I won't commit myself to any particular period of time between the 17th of December and when I produce a report. And I think it would help both clarity and transparency if Fujitsu did clarify that.
I will take that up with the department as well. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, all right. Mr. Steen.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Patterson, we've met before. Can we go straight to a document which is FUJ 00243-199? So that's FUJ 00243-199. Now, so that's the letter dated the 17th of May that you're familiar with. And on that first page, can we scroll down, please, to Roman numeral 2, pursuit of shortfalls from postmasters. And we'll see there, Mr. Patterson. Let's just read through that together. So this is a letter from you to Mr. Reid, and the relevant part that I'm going to take you to, therefore, says, it seems that the Post Office may be continuing to pursue postmasters for shortfalls in their accounts using Horizon data. We would have expected that the Post Office has changed its behaviour in light of the criticisms and is appropriately circumspect with respect to any enforcement actions. It should not be relying on Horizon data as the basis for such shortfall enforcement. Now, this appears to be a fairly serious letter. Did you mean what this says?
I know what I wrote.
Did you mean it?
Well, it's what I wrote, Mr. Steen.
Well, you either mean something or you don't, Mr. Patterson. Is that correct in what it seems to say, which is the Post Office should not be using Horizon data to go after sub-postmasters for shortfalls?
I think, as I've said during the last hour or so, there is multiple data points that the Post Office should be using before they conclude whether a shortfall or a theft has taken place.
Let's try it one more time. Well, let's try it again. It should not be relying on Horizon data as the basis for shortfall enforcement. When you wrote that, was that what you felt?
Yes, Mr. Steen.
Do you still stand by that?
I think, as I've given in evidence today several times, you cannot rely on just one data source.
Well, it's not quite the same thing, is it?
No, it is exactly the same thing. It's Horizon data, and I've said you can't rely on one source of data.
Right. So Horizon data should not be used by the Post Office to go after sub-postmasters for what the Post Office reckons may be money owed by the sub-postmaster. Is that right?
So, Mr. Steen, there's 4 investigations at the moment with the police. We have given material to the police which talks about all the data that they should frankly be looking at to determine whether a theft has taken place or whatever the crime is.
Does it amount to this, Mr. Patterson, that perhaps to use that phrase much loved of in this inquiry, with the benefit of hindsight, this sentence should read, it should not be relying solely on Horizon data, etc.
Yes, Sir Wynne, yes.
Fine, thank you.
I have the word basis and solely as interchangeable.
Yeah.
The point you made earlier in your evidence, Mr. Patterson, was one whereby you referred to it as one data point. In other words, that there should be something else outside of Horizon data. Is that what you're trying to say here in your evidence?
Yes, and that was my point earlier about the complete supply chain that provides information to Horizon and actually to sub-postmasters themselves. You cannot rely solely on one data source.
Right. So on its own, Horizon data is insufficient to mount a case against a sub-postmaster for a shortfall. Is that what you're trying to say?
So I am not a legal person. I'm not a legal. In my view, and in our company's view, you cannot rely on that solely for the data.
To pursue people for shortfalls?
Yes.
Right. And Fujitsu's position on this, will you support the Post Office in pursuing sub-postmasters for shortfalls?
We've said we won't do that.
Right. Okay. So let's add this all together. Fujitsu will not support the Post Office if the Post Office is going after a postmaster for a shortfall, either in I suppose, correspondence with that sub-postmaster or in courts. Is that correct?
I thought you were going to add another sentence based solely on Horizon data.
Well, that's the one you've added today, prompted by Sir Wynne. But
Well, I'll go the other way. Based on shortfall data.
Right.
So whether you want to use basis or solely, the same thing applies.
So what's going to have to happen? You're going to have to be persuaded that there's something else other than Horizon data before you provide support to the Post Office? How's it going to work, Mr. Patterson?
So, as I've said in my evidence today, there are multiple data sources, and if you look at the YouGov data, about different places where errors or omissions or issues can occur. All of that needs to be in play, and the investigation needs to be not taking a narrow view, but a holistic view.
So are you going to get the Post Office to come to you, provide the data, and then see what else comes up? Or do you need the support? In other words, something other than Horizon data before you hand over the Horizon data? Which is it?
So Horizon data, as I said earlier, will be inside the Post Office's house by February, all historical data. So they'll have all the data that are required. And I think in evidence from several members of the Post Office executive, they've got that data already. So they've got the data that they need. My evidence point is I would like to be satisfied that they are using more than just one data source. And I've not seen anything anything which tells me that they're using more than one data source.
I see. So in that sense, if we put this all together, frankly, you don't trust the Post Office in order to get this right.
Well, on this particular topic, I absolutely don't trust the Post Office.
Understand. You mentioned one further point in your evidence to Mr. Blake. This is about the age of the system, okay? You said this. To give this some context, we have not turned off some of this equipment because it's so old.
Mm-hmm.
Help us understand what would happen if you did turn it on.
I've got no idea.
Right.
So in my experience of 35 years in this industry, you know, if you do not do disaster recovery, if you do not turn things on, if you don't keep them upgraded, I cannot determine what will or will not happen, which is part of our nervousness about any extension.
Let's turn back to the question that I asked you now many months ago in January of this year. Now, I asked you these questions, which was, you're aware of the effect of this scandal upon sub-postmasters. It's felt by their families, by their loved ones, by their partners, by their children. This devastated not only the sub-postmasters' individual lives, but everyone around them. Sub-postmasters, because they could not see what was going on, would sometimes blame their own partners or their employees. And the effect, therefore, of this scandal is much more widespread than on the sub-postmasters themselves, whose lives sometimes have been terminated by this scandal. And I asked you this. Will Fujitsu commit to providing funds in recompense for all those hurts to others outside of sub-postmasters and the compensation scheme? In other words, financial redress to support others that have been affected. I ask this. You may want to think that what could be done by Fujitsu is supporting people in the future, sub-postmasters in future entrepreneurial endeavours, their families in such or in education. Will Fujitsu consider that type of support? And you said this. Mr. Steen, the inquiry and the exploration of the history of all of this is getting a great deal of attention and support from us. Our company here in the UK has many things in society around the country, around the UK. I think the suggestion you've just made, and clearly, you said it, the transcript says, clearly in a conversation, I think you meant is a conversation. If I were able to come to engage with sub-postmasters and their representation, their representatives, we would be absolutely something we would like to consider. So you appear to be giving a positive answer to the general suggestion, which is providing some way to provide support. Today, in answer to the questions on such matters, you've said that Fujitsu wishes to engage in a discussion with government. You mentioned also sub-postmasters as to providing the financial support that would go to government. Now, has Fujitsu written off doing something more creative than that? In other words, setting up a fund, bursaries for the children, for the families, for those people with lost opportunities? Have they written that off, and is it just going to be money to government?
So when I met the sub-postmasters, there were many, many suggestions. And in fact, one sub-postmaster made it clear to me the company should not be giving any money to government at all. We are not we've got no experience of setting up these things or doing these things. As I just said to the lost families, we were hoping that through government channels we'd be able to provide funds to contribute to some of those areas. To be more creative, we're struggling to find out how we can be more creative, frankly, because that's not something we've got any experience in. I was hoping, equally from this morning's conversation, that there would be more activity in and around the law and changing the law or lobbying for the law to change, because I was personally, as a normal citizen, surprised that the families did not have recourse to some of those other areas of compensation. But I haven't written it off, Mr. Steen. I'm just not quite sure where to go.
Well, where to go, Mr. Patterson, is to go back to the representatives representing people that have been in this situation and say, can you help? We are, if this is right, Fujitsu is trying to see what can be done. Do you have experience with compensation frameworks, redress schemes, restorative justice schemes? And you will find that Howe & Co., Mr. Enright, who sits to my left, who sits to Mr. Kelly's right, you may recall Mr. Kelly from meetings, he does have that expertise. The people are out there, Mr. Patterson. why haven't you reached out since January of this year to those people that can provide such assistance for you on these important queries?
So there's no reason why I haven't reached out. I've had the meetings, Mr. Steen. Thank you for the suggestion. We'll have the conversation in due course with the colleagues. As an IT company, we are unsure where to go and what to do about it. We were hoping that the compensation schemes and contributing to the government compensation schemes would be a suitable vehicle for redress.
But you know that those compensation schemes are not providing this type of support to the wider family. So all that appears to be happening is Fujitsu is contemplating a contribution, subbing the government for the compensation schemes that are currently in place. That's what you seem to be saying.
So that is what I was saying earlier, and what you've just suggested to me is that your organisation or colleagues may have some expertise in these other areas, and we'll have that conversation.
Is there a standstill agreement between the civil action from the post office and Fujitsu as to whether the one, post office, will sue the other, Fujitsu?
Yes, there is.
So, in essence, what may be happening here, do you agree, Mr. Patterson, is Fujitsu is considering paying some compensation towards the compensation funds in order to stave off as a way of settling the action from the post office against Fujitsu. That's what it appears to be, Mr. Patterson.
Well, it's not, Mr. Steen.
So any funds committed by Fujitsu towards compensation will not be in settlement of the claim between Post Office and Fujitsu. Is that what you're saying?
So Mr. Steen, I have had no conversation with the Post Office about the standstill agreement. That's our legal teams and our legal teams. As far as I'm concerned, if there's any contribution to compensation, it will always be outside that conversation.
And lastly, where in all of this is the situation that's been described, which is that Fujitsu awaits the close of the inquiry? Now, Sir Wynne has asked you some questions. What do you mean by the end of the inquiry? Is that this year, or is that at some point next year when the inquiry reports? Okay, fine. Why is it that Fujitsu wants to wait until the end of the inquiry before dealing with such matters? What's the rationale?
So when I sat in this room in January, there were some things I knew and I didn't know. I've now spent the last 7 months, as you have, listening to evidence about what other people and other organisations did or didn't do. The notion that this is all down to a software bug and has contributed to the largest miscarriage of justice in the United Kingdom is incorrect. These are complex matters, as you well know, based over many, many decades. And we have learnt as an organisation a great deal about the causes of this miscarriage of justice.
Yes, well, let's go back to my question. Why is it that Fujitsu needs to await the close of this inquiry before it deals with matters such as compensation or contributions towards compensation?
For the reasons I've just said, these are complex matters which we need to understand all those components. Now, what we do know, and as I said to Sir Wynne just a moment ago, by the time we get to the end of this week, we'll have a better idea on a number of those topics about how we can contribute. You've given me a suggestion here, and I've already committed to meeting with the lost families.
But Mr. Patterson, you already accept that there is a need for Fujitsu to put its money where its mouth is. You already accept that there's at least a discussion to be had about supporting people that have been affected by the scandal. Why wait? Is this legal advice? Wait until the end of the inquiry when it's all gone quiet?
Far from it gone quiet. I don't expect this to go quiet at all. Why should it go quiet? These are serious matters.
But is this your decision to wait till the end of the inquiry, or is it legal advice? What is it, Mr. Fujitsu? Who's telling you to wait until the end of the inquiry?
I'm not sure about answering that question fully. He can say, I'm not going to tell you about our legal advice, can't
That's
he?
true, but it is his choice.
Yeah, well, I'm just reminding him he has a choice.
Yes. Mr. Patterson?
I mean, the reality, Mr. Patterson, isn't it, is that by listening to all the evidence first, you will have a much better idea about the culpability of Fujitsu, if any. Isn't that the reality of it?
Yes, it is, Sir Wynne.
Yeah, fine. Thank you.
So the end result of this is that we know that the Post Office has indicated that they wish to bring forward restorative justice proposals. Will Fujitsu commit to supporting that?
So you asked me a question a moment ago, do I trust the Post Office?
Well, you've got a choice, Mr. Patterson. You can reject working with the post office as you like. Will Fujitsu commit to supporting restorative justice proposals?
So the new management team inside the post office, I would welcome that opportunity to sit down and talk to them about those topics. Yes, Mr. Steen.
Sooner rather than later.
I spoke to the post office executives on Friday. I'm speaking to them again on Thursday. So sooner rather than later, yes.
And avoiding any other problems, will you commit also to meeting with Mr. Enright and his team from Howe & Co. sooner rather than later?
So, Mr. Steen, you've asked me that question before as well, and the answer is I won't commit to that.
You won't
Thank you,
commit?
Mr.
No, not sooner rather than later. You've just given me a whole bunch of caveats to that meeting. You've just offered to me that you've got some experience in those areas. I will talk to my team about how do we get the value from that conversation. But I'm not going to sit down and commit to meeting Mr. Enright tomorrow or today or whenever. I need to have that conversation first.
All right, well, it's avoiding tomorrow. What
Well,
about
you said the words tomorrow and today, and was there anything? You gave me a number of caveats.
before Christmas?
That's enough, gentlemen. That's enough. I think I've got the picture. Thank you very much, and it's finishing dead on time, Mr. Steen, so well done.
Thanks, sir.
Right, good. We'll resume again at 10 o'clock tomorrow, but first, or lastly today, I should thank you, Mr. Patterson, for appearing again at the inquiry, for producing witness statements on behalf of Fujitsu, and making the commitments to the extent that you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Wynne.